Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, welcome once again to my children's library for another Thursday of the Mattriarchy. I was setting up today and I was looking at the bookshelf and I got the biggest chuckle because, you know, it's a bookshelf, so it makes you look all smart and stuff, except like the hungry caterpillar is right over there. So I had to laugh about that. Today, I have a special guest host, Twitless from Super Schooled, the admittedly better looking but less interesting superhero comic online about superheroes in superhero high school and supervillain high school. So there you go. And joining us as guests are the ridiculously prolific, ironically so, given the bunny there, Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini. Thank you guys for coming on. And we're set today to talk about how is it that a couple of guys who are not professional routinely put out the most professional comic books in the indie sphere, bar none.
That's very complimentary. I think it really just comes from people saying that or noticing that, because honestly, Mark and I have no clue what we're doing at all. We've only been doing this for 2 years, and so the proof is in the pudding. Like every time we put a book out, honestly, we wait for like the one review, the first one to come out to be like, is this good or is it just something that we made for chuckles? So a couple of reviewers who we rely on consistently are you and number one Marmaduke fan, because I think that the two of you are very analytical. And I think what we try to do is if we can get our point across to you or a he or both of you, we feel like we've achieved something, but you never know. We have no clue what we're doing, frankly.
It's right. It's like that song, like, how did I get here? You know, what?
So
we published 10 books. How did that happen?
The Talking Heads one?
Yeah. No, I was thinking of the Kermit the Frog version, but yeah, that one's good too.
I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
Oh,
it's that song, like, this is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife. How did I get here? That one.
It's water underground.
I've never heard that one.
And the days go by, there's no water from. You haven't heard that song, Tim?
Oh my God, water flowing underground. That's same as it ever was.
That's because Tim listens to like theme park playlists on YouTube and just listens to the Great American Adventure and Carousel of Progress audio.
So basically, your entire listening experience is do 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 do.
Yes, it is, like 100%.
Wow. Well, David Byrne, who is a crazy person, 100% and without a question, one of those artists who like is completely over the bend. Was the leader for a band called the Talking Heads that were on they're kind of a new wave art house band from the 80s. And I love them because I think they're brilliant, but they're also crazy people music.
It's like Devo, right? You're like, okay, I guess I have to be in the mood for something incredibly bizarre.
Yeah, they're like Devo, like Depeche Mode, that kind of thing too. They're just that they're crazy people music, but it's also kind of genius. So,
well, you say crazy people. You're also the cultured one amongst us, amongst our sphere of influence. You're probably one of the most cultured people that we know. I admittedly have no musical taste whatsoever, and so all of the music I listen to is very, very superficially saccharine, and there's no depth to it whatsoever.
Taylor Swift?
No, I'm not that bad. Not like Metro McCheese.
Yeah, I don't understand. I have a buddy of mine here in Scotts Bluff who's a very good musician, and he does a down-tempo version of Shake It Off by Taylor Swift. But it's like down-tempo. It might even be minor keyed, but it's like super like intense and great.
Is he doing like Johnny Cash's like rendition? Like what he did? Was it?
Yeah, Hurt Myself.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but 9 Inch Nails did the original, which I was shocked because everyone just knows the Johnny Cash version.
Oh yeah. Johnny Cash's was way better. Or
that sounds like the reverse of like the way the timeline should be. You think Johnny Cash would have done the original, and Nine Inch Nails would have done the
Yeah,
cover.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It was, yeah, I was shocked when I learned that.
Well, another similar take on that whole phenomenon. There is oh my goodness, I'm going to forget his name. He was in Wham.
George Michael.
George Michael, thank you. Did a song that ended up being in the soundtrack for Donnie Darko, and I can't remember the guy who Mad World. And George Michael version is poppy, saccharine-y. It doesn't really, the tone of the song doesn't really match the tone of the lyrics. And then some like indie industrial band redid it. Well, not really industrial, but they redid it in the 90s, and it was like and down tempoed. I believe they took it to a minor key as well, and it's just like a way different song. And,
well, yeah, it's like, have you ever heard some of like a lot of Elvis's songs were covers of like blues songs and like jazz songs and stuff, and it were soul songs. And like Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog, I had no idea that was a cover, and then I went and I listened to the original version.
The original is bad.
Yeah, it's really slow. I mean, I don't know if it's bad because I'm just so used to the Elvis version, but the Elvis version, that one's really boring. Oh God, it's just nothing but like 2 hours of vocals.
and 16-part harmony. I didn't understand it at all.
It's sung in this weird old English variant language.
Yeah. It was better than the orc version, though.
Well, yes,
that's the death metal version. Yeah.
So I don't know, and actually, side note on that, I don't know if you guys are big Lord of the Rings fans. So this is a bit of trivia. That is, it's right in The Hobbit, but it's something that I think a lot of people miss on. Because there's a little section in The Hobbit when they first go into Moria, right? And the goblins or orcs are there, and they're causing all the trouble. And Tolkien goes on a little tirade about the sound of language, and his theory that the sounds of language influence the attitudes of the singers, right? That and the reason that English is that the English people are more noble in spirit and more gentler in mind is because English has all of these different influences that have produced harmony within the sounds of English. This is subtextual a little bit. He's
so
talking about
this is his way of pissing all over Germans for having such
it really was. Where the language of the orcs is guttural and it's abusive and
harsh.
It's painful, and of course the music of the orcs is guttural and painful and abusive, like that damn polka music. I mean, orcish music, and it's just really. I mean, if he was working out some of his problems from the trenches.
Maybe I will say that. I mean, Tolkien owed a lot to Germanic influences. I don't think he would shy away from that.
Well, no. Well, and a lot of the Germanic influences that he drew from in terms of story are actually they're more tangentially a lot of the Finnish cycles. Yeah. Which Finland is of the Norse countries. Finland is the least German influenced nation. Because they had a lot from Russia and the native Sami culture that changed their language a lot. So the mythic cycle, and I'm going to forget the name of it.
Nibelung?
No, that was German. Oh. No, they have their own thing.
Oh,
with
Moomins? The Finnish...
No.
Moomins? No, but talking about like language and song and how language influences the song. So, like, did you know that Family Guy is still making new episodes? I didn't, but yeah, no, they still have one funny joke per season.
Listen, Mark, no fake news. Family Guy hasn't made new episodes since the first season. It's all the same joke. Come on.
Well, they have like one funny joke per season, and this one was like Stewie was watching the opera, and he's listening to it, and then he like swoons to himself like, Italians. I hate to hear them talk, but I love to hear them sing.
Okay, that's legitimately funny. I can't even fault that. So, and here's the thing with Family Guy that gets me crazy, right? Like, this is totally not comic book related, but I'm going to say it anyway. Damn it. The thing is that the Family Guy, their formula is that they just throw everything they can at the reader, right? No matter how awkward or clumsy or embarrassing it is, at the viewer, I should say. And so there's all this constant stuff, and the speed of delivery of jokes sets people on edge. So you catch them with one super embarrassing thing that they giggle over because it's embarrassing, or one genuinely funny joke, and then it just snowballs, and everything else that they have just like tracks along and along. Before long, you're mindlessly laughing at things that you try to tell your buddy about at the water cooler, and it's just not funny.
It's Uzi style comedy. You just you just spray and pray.
So it's like if Airplane or Police Squad, The Naked Gun are a good version of rapid fire quantity comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Like Family Guy is more like Scary Movie 4 and Epic Movie, like that end of that spectrum of they're technically in the same genre, but one's doing it wrong. Like you can tell when you watch Family Guy that they obviously got a lot of inspiration from The Simpsons, and there's this great channel on YouTube called The Real Jims, JIMS, where he talks about The Simpsons, and he does like some deconstruction and he does a lot of interviews and stuff, but the way the Simpsons writers' room worked back then was that they would come up with a joke, and then they would have to plus it 3 or 4 times over. And there's a formula to a Simpsons joke where it's never just one joke. It's a joke, and then a fake out, and then a screw the audience, and then a punchline. So it's constantly like you said, keeping you on edge, where they're building you up, and you kind of don't know where the joke ends until it gets there. Yeah. Like Family Guy tries to do that, but the lesson they learned was too superficial. It's like, oh, it's like cutaways, just a whole bunch of cutaways really fast, and then just a whole bunch of like just bullshit thrown at you. And maybe if you throw 7 jokes at the audience, maybe one of them is funny, that kind of thing.
Superficial understanding of the fundamental mechanics of things sounds a lot like Seth MacFarlane.
Very much like Seth MacFarlane, except he's a multi-millionaire, so I guess he wins.
No, you don't win because you have money. You win because you win. That's
he won. He won because he got drunk and didn't get on that plane on September 11th, which is a true story. So,
yeah, there you go. I'll give you that.
Someone in the universe was looking out for him for some reason. Maybe someone was like, the Orwell's going to come one of these days. We need to keep him alive. Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I can't comment.
It's not good.
I've heard something, but some people like it, I guess. Some people
they say it's better than Star Trek Discovery, which is like damning with faint praise. But I'm not really a Star Trek guy, so I don't really get it.
Who is a good Star Trek guy is Matt Trin, and he would have an opinion about this, but he's not here today. Anyway.
True story. I almost DM'd Matt Trin today to ask what time we were streaming because I forgot. I don't know.
All these
I typed in Matt and it went to the wrong Matt.
Matt Reese, Matt Weldon, Matt Trin.
Well, there's an easy way to tell us apart, right? Is that my last name isn't Trin.
No, it was autofilling Matt, and it autofilled the wrong Matt. I thought it would autofill for you, but you think that's bad? We know like 12 Dougs. So
they're all good too.
They're all good.
Yeah.
Doug E, Doug T.
And I would like to say that the Matt ratio is not as sweet as the Doug ratio. So
there's a lot of them though. There's Matt Went, Matt Reese, Matt Trin, Matt Weldon.
Yeah. You know why? Well, and not necessarily all of them, because some of them aren't in the same age group as I, but there are a bunch in my age group. And in 77, 78, and 79, Matt was the 3rd most common name for boys in North America and Canada. So
I believe it.
I guess North America together, that is the States and Canada is North America. So
hey, look at the zeitgeist of 1978 and 79. Was there a famous Matt that a bunch of women were swooning over and they all wanted to name their kids Matt?
Not that I'm aware of. I know.
Well, there was that era though.
There was a chair shortage, is what happened.
I miss that era of people naming their children after like biblical names. So this is one of those subjects that is like, it's not taboo, but it's also something you don't mention, which is criticizing what people are naming their children nowadays. My rule of thumb is do not name your kids anything that sounds like a Mortal Kombat character. Like I had this. Oh my gosh! Nah, she doesn't listen to this channel. I'm pretty sure she doesn't listen to any of our channels. But she got married, and she didn't know if she wanted to name her kid Kyle or Tyler, so they named their kid Kyler. And I was like, that sounds like a Mortal Kombat name. Like, choose your fighter, Kyler. Like, okay, if you can say it in that voice, like Shao Kahn.
But don't
name your kid that.
How is that a bad thing? I would totally love a kid named Shao Kahn.
Shao Kahn, yes. Kyler, no.
I think a lot of people are naming their kids the same way you would name your pet, like to amuse yourself, not because it's a good name. That you don't care if your pet gets made fun of, but you really care if your kid does. Like, I named my cat Goblin. I'm never gonna name my son Goblin unless he's really ugly.
See, and when I came up with when we decided to name our sons, I gave zero interest in whether or not they were going to get made fun of, because the fact of the matter is, like, children are humans and humans are evil. So you don't have to give them a reason to make fun of them. They will.
Oh, they'll find something.
My name is fairly boring. It's Matthew Dean Reese, right? And as a child, the taunt thrown at me by the other little bastards was Reese Monkey Grease. That is meaningless. That was meaningless, but when
it was
I was
the way they said it, right?
When I was 6, I was like,
voice.
but why don't they like me? I'm amazing. Right? So, and I'm not really that amazing, but I didn't understand why. But of course, at 6, I didn't understand human depravity, so that's a different story. So when we named my sons, we just gave them names that we thought were cool. And my oldest is Donovan, and
it's a normal name though.
Yeah, it is. They're real names. They're Donovan and Taliesin.
Oh, Tim. So it's not okay to name your son after a Mortal Kombat character, but you can name your son after a Darkstalkers character.
You can. You absolutely can.
I'm totally gonna name my kid Noob Cybot.
Yeah.
I don't even know what Darkstalkers is. No, I named.
All right, then. My son's getting named Lord Raptor. Thank you, Tim.
You better.
You got to go with like Killer Instinct or something. You got to have a different. Like, I'll do Mortal Kombat, and then you do Killer Instinct.
TJ combo.
Yeah, there we go. Full gore.
Full gore. Yeah.
I don't think I play enough video games, but yeah, my oldest son, we just liked the name, and it turns out that my grandfather's cousin was Donovan Reese. And so my whole family loved it because it was like, oh, it's a family name. It's good. It's strong. We like that. And I was like, okay.
You rolled the dice and you won. All right.
Yeah. And that one was great. And of course, my youngest son was named after the 6th century Welsh poet. So there you have that. But anyway, we didn't come here to talk about my kids. We came to talk about comics. So, although my children do help me make comics, so that's fun. Anyway, but all of that aside, Tim, we have somebody came into the chat talking about Common America, which is up on the screen, and my goodness, people love that story. Did you expect to have this kind of reaction to it?
No, no. To be honest, that's why the book is only 48 pages, because we just figured it was just an itch that needed to be scratched. When we conceptualized the character, it was in reaction to the positive response to the Warhammer design from Walmite, First Term Part 2. So after some brainstorming, actually just on my own, I approached Mark and I said, why don't we try and fill in a niche by taking the Warhammer character and spinning her off and using her as a vehicle for maybe a lot of political humor that's not attached to Trump. So that's initially how she started. But the reality is that because by the end of the year, we were already planning on phasing out a lot of the political parody, she obviously turned into something else. But we never, I think, had in our minds that she would be anything greater than what we'd already done. We just thought, like, let's just do it to get it done and then see how it goes. So the first day that we crowdfunded it, I think I was probably more shocked than anyone that the reception turned out better than I thought. And now, obviously, I chalked that up to the fact that she's kind of a cheesecakey character. So obviously, that's going to have some selling appeal to it. So I just thought, it's a fluke. When people read it, they're gonna, it's gonna be take it or leave it. They might think it's like disposable entertainment. So I think Mark and I have listened to pretty much every review that's been done on it. And aside from one that I can think of, I think it was pretty much universally, if not praised, but they understood at least the meaning or the bare minimum of what we were trying to accomplish. And that's good because...
Well, that was the biggest relief because, like you said, the immediate response to the book when we started pre-orders for it was very positive. We sold a whole lot more than we were intending. And the way Tim and I work is that the book's already done. That's why we call them pre-orders instead of a crowdfunding campaign. And so like, oh God, the book's already done. All these people are excited for it. I really hope they like it. Otherwise, they're going to be really mad at us. And then the reviews came in, and we were pretty confident about the book. We were very proud of it, but you never know how it's going to do out in the wild, you know. And the readers and the audience really received it well. So that was a huge load off our minds.
And one of the things that's excuse me, one of the things that's really interesting about the way that Common America rolled out too was you guys first went to Kickstarter, which was new for you, new audience in some ways. I know there's some people like me who crossed over between them. But that was a really interesting thing to see on that, and it just was on fire. And I think you guys shipped that before you started the IndieGoGo, right?
That's correct. We did the fulfillment on it before we started the IndieGoGo campaign,
So
just to make sure all that stuff
that ordered on IndieGoGo, assuming they weren't all people that were just like, "Nah, I need 2 copies of this for reasons." Because there were probably some. You swap the cover around. There are completionists out there reading comic books.
Sure.
But those people had a chance to hear the reviews and to hear the reaction. And you know, one of the things I think is really fun about it is it's not a super deep story, a super complex story, but it has some depth to the storytelling. But it's also it's one of those things that it's just so much fun, and people had a chance to see that going into it. That other people were really digging on it. Do you think the positive reaction from those early reviewers had a huge impact on the IndieGoGo platform campaign? Or
the real MVP is just some guy. Yeah. So he backed the Kickstarter. He got the book. He reviewed it while the IndieGoGo campaign was going. And he gave us a very analytical, in-depth review. A lot of people saw it, and we got a lot of comments on the IndieGoGo campaign in the comment section. People saying like, "Just some guy sent me the review, and the book looked really good." So, big props to just some guy. You my boy.
Yeah, it was very helpful. But there was a lot of things that I learned from it, even now, because even to this day, I'm getting all these messages from people saying, "Hey, I just found out about this. Where do I get it?" It's both enlightening and disheartening at the same time. So obviously the positive is good because we got more eyes on it, but here's the negative. So with Kickstarter, it's a more robust marketplace. People are looking for books. They do a lot of their shopping on Kickstarter. A lot of people just like backing things. They don't even pay attention to when they're going to get it. To them, it's like an investment. They just think the idea is cool and they put money into it. So the comic book market there is really good. IndieGoGo is more insular. There's a lot of tribalism that happens where typically it's word of mouth, it's referrals, it's people who found out through YouTubers. But I think probably the most disheartening thing about it, though, and it's not for just some guy, it's for other people, but I would get messages from people who say, "Well, I heard from a guy who heard from just some guy that I should back your book. I've never heard about you because person X never talks about you." And I don't know how to reply to this guy because I'm like, person X doesn't like me very much. Or person X doesn't like us very much. So if you're getting they basically admitted to the fact that they only back and buy products from basically 2 sources. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, well, I don't know how healthy that is because if you look at it, I know there's a lot of boycotting of Kickstarter, but the people on Kickstarter have been very friendly. Like, the people who contacted me are just like, "Hey, I've never heard of you before. Where can I find more of your work? Do you have a link to your website? Where can we find the other books?" So it's this kind of like very robust marketplace. Whereas I feel like IndieGoGo, just the tribalism and the kind of whisper network of people talking about, "Here's what you do." I cannot speculate to where the customer's coming from on that end, but it did tell me something, which is you cannot just rely on IndieGoGo in and of itself as an insular place to get the sales that you want. You are going to have some outside network of people basically referring you in order to hear about it. So it's been an interesting learning lesson in terms of marketing and reaching potential buyers and customers.
Yeah, I mean, so we appreciate any customer who is giving us a chance, even if person X doesn't like us, and so they initially weren't going to read our book, but then they saw something about it, whether it was another person's review or whether they just decided to go and look at the pictures of the campaign, and if they were convinced to give us a chance, then we're always grateful to those people. With IndieGoGo, I mean, we know that it isn't the same as Kickstarter. I know that this is a thing that people do, because I do it too, is a lot of the times people who will only go Kickstarter or IndieGoGo, it's not so much about philosophy, it's about not wanting to create two accounts. And I'm guilty of that sometimes, where like for the longest time I was buying like all my like NECA Ultimates stuff from Amazon, and my attitude was like, if it's not on sale on Amazon, I guess I'm just not going to buy it. And then I finally made an account on Big Bad Toy Store, and I was like, why didn't I do this 5 years ago? Like, why was I like, I didn't want to make an account for Big Bad Toy Store. It's not that hard, but I totally get that mindset. You make an account for one site, so you only use that one site, and it just happens.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things too. I like a lot of people do not want to have multiple accounts, and once again, I don't understand that too much. And maybe that's because, I'm from the old days of the internet, where like you had to have an account on every message board you were interested in. You had to have an account on, it was just the way it was, And I didn't get on Facebook for quite a few years because I just wasn't that interested in social media. And I had a bunch of friends from high school, a bunch of friends from college that were emailing me. And it's like, dude, I never check my email. Go to Facebook. Okay. You badgered me into it, you bastards. And I've rarely regretted the decision since, but yeah, it's one of those things where I think that there is a lot of that where people just have their preferred platform. I know I personally prefer to use IndieGoGo because I like having my money taken out now, not later. Right. So I don't have to because I don't handle my books, right? Cards on the table. The wife takes care of that because she's better at it, and I am bad with numbers. So I go to work. I bring home the checks. She takes care of all of the rest of it, and I don't have to think about it, which is great. But I don't. But so I'd prefer saying, okay, here's the I'm going to spend this. It's out now, as opposed to, oh, by the way, in 6 weeks, they're going to get charged $25.
I'm like that with pre-orders and just about anything. Like I actually don't pre-order very often on like Amazon or even on Big Bad Toy Store, because that happens. I'll pre-order something. I'll forget that I pre-ordered it. I'll forget when the release date is. And then I'll look at my bank account and suddenly there'll be like a $25 charge. Like, oh, crap, I did pre-order that. Nah, I guess I'm eating ramen this week.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that I do think that the numbers of like holdouts have more to do with the comfort with platforms and less to do with the kind of philosophical loyalty that I think certain people want to push that as being more important than it really is. I know I know that's a motive, but I don't think it's as big a motive as people want to pretend it is. And I think honestly, that your success on Kickstarter and Doug TenNapel when he did Earthworm Jim's second campaign on Kickstarter are both evidences that that's the case for those kind of products, because they already Doug already had a crossover market between them, and he had some people that followed and some people that didn't. And I think that your Common America campaign is evidentiary that the platform is less important than the product.
Yeah, I'd like to hope so, because it's one thing to, everyone's success is measured in different ways, and it's one thing to attribute success to a platform or a source, but the reality is that the most flattering thing that you can have is to just succeed because the product is good and that you have faith in it. So we can't really measure any success until the people get the product in their hands and they read it and they give us feedback on whether they like it or not. And then we take notes for the next time. And we're fairly thick-skinned about it because it doesn't hurt us either way. If someone is like, this looks really amateurish and the storytelling is bad, then we're just like, well, we're amateurs, so okay, that's fine. But then if they say, oh, it's really good, then we've exceeded our own expectations, because like, oh, that's great, because we're any positive criticism is good as well. So we're kind of in a neat place as far as that's concerned whenever we do handle critiques or commentary and whatnot.
Yeah. So I had a question about the campaign thing. Oh, so with you guys just I mean, you didn't finish up, but am I correct that you are out of books for the Walmart Gold Standard?
We are completely out. What I am thinking about doing is that probably once every 3 days we get 2 refunds, and I don't think that's because of people necessarily who hate us or whatever. I think it's just people find out that their finances are not up to snuff and they just need the money at the moment. So you'll have like the transactional refund, and then typically within an hour it gets sold again. So we're back to 0 copies left. But we do have an overprinting that we keep in case of incidentals. What I am thinking about doing is in the last days of the campaign is just releasing like 10 out in the wild within the last 24 hours, just because I know that in that time span when I warn people that the campaign's about to end, some people might be thinking to themselves like, oh crap, if I'm going to back out, I need to back out now because I need the money to eat for the month or whatever.
Right.
So I think releasing a little bit of that overhead is not going to matter that much. In the past, we typically hold on to 50 copies, but for example, in Common America, I think we only had to replace 10, and that was out of 2,000 that we had physically sent out. So that was really, really, really minuscule compared to like the totality of what we printed. So I think releasing 10 into the wild at the very last minute, I don't think will impact anything. But as far as numbers are concerned, I mean, we are out. I mean, we're not printing any more than what we already have.
So are you looking at doing a second run campaign on Kickstarter, or just IndieGoGo is it because that's the home of Walmart?
That's the home of Walmart. The other thing too is that I had this talk with Doug Tenaple. I don't know if you were in the chat when we were talking about it, but Kickstarter obviously is a platform that is notorious for being left-wing. At least that's how the perception is. And because they were kind enough to platform us the first time on Common America, and they approved us right away without any hesitancy whatsoever, I just felt like it was incumbent on us and it behooved us to be nice and not poke the bear, so to speak. So since we'd had success with crowdfunding and pre-ordering Trump-related books on IndieGoGo without any fuss, that it wouldn't hurt anything to stay on the platform and don't try to step on their toes as far as future campaigns are concerned that are like Trump-related.
And for people who are interested in Walmart 3, The Magalorian, which is the third part of the trilogy, it's going to be in the Gold Standard collection. But if you've already bought one in Magademia and Walmart First Term Part 2, if you've already bought Volume 1 and Volume 2, Volume 3 is going to get released individually in stores in either late July or early August. So you'll have a chance to get that story even if you missed out on the Gold Standard Omnibus and you just wanted Magalorian. That one's going to be in stores.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I'm actually planning on doing both because I have the single issues and I'm just like, but I wanted the extra content.
Oh, I can tell you this. So I don't know if
the extra content.
I don't know if you're more of a reader, a collector, or kind of a mixture of both. But what I've been hearing from some people is that they have issues 1 and 2, but they're buying the omnibus and they're going to buy the third book. And they're telling me that what they're doing is they're selling the first and second issues. The reason why is My Hero Macadamia is in its 9th printing as of 2 weeks ago. And Walmart, Captain Cummings, I think, showed it to us, but I think he sold his copy for $80 on eBay because it's the campaign version. Like it has like, I don't know how many extra pages, 8, I think.
Yeah.
8 or 12 extra pages, something like that. And so he sold it and he showed Mark and I couldn't believe it. I was like, $80, like holy cow, that's crazy. So some people are doing that, I'm sure.
Yeah. I went ahead and got the into the campaign because I wanted the extra stuff for and I missed the boat on the first one. I was a little short for cash because I'd bought in a certain book named after a hard candy.
A hard candy. Oh, Gobstoppers.
Yeah, that was the one. It didn't quite live up to my expectations, but it's candy. So
well, I hope that not necessarily you per se, but just people who have followed us for the last 2 years, I hope that they're noticing that our prices are going down incrementally to the point where we're now able to price anywhere between $10 and $20, and that's because of I guess the fact of crowdfunding is you're trying to generate capital. And at least within our first year of doing it, we did generate the capital where we could actually pay for work ahead of time and then pass that savings on to the customer.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think is you guys are showing a real success in the model that I'm more than a little jealous about, to be perfectly honest. But that's okay, you know.
There's nothing to be jealous about. We are amateurs for sure. So, and a lot of it is just a fluke.
In case you forget, Tim, I have been making comics online since 2005, and my comic is routinely read by 12 people. So, you guys have got. I mean, your work ethic is amazing. Your artistic quality is top notch. Your writing is. It's okay. And
oh, thanks. I'm just the writer, but it's all right.
Shade has been thrown.
No, it's good. It's good, Mark. I'm just giving you crap. But no, it's one of those things. I think you guys have really. I mean, I know part of it is you guys have worked together for a long time. You guys have the synergy, as they say, and the willingness to go out there and make a comic that people want. Because it's just that niche wasn't getting scratched in a lot of ways, where
we cheat though. The way that we've had any success is very formulaic, because all we've done. So it was actually my wife who cued me into it. So she has an accounting degree, and going back to Thump, like why we decided to do that book back in 2016, post-election, there was nothing Trump related. There was no merchandise or anything like that. And she told me about this concept called the blue ocean. And I was like, what's the blue ocean? And she said, well, in business, it's referring to if you're on the beach and you're looking at the land and you're looking at all the condos, you're looking in the wrong place. You should turn around and look at the blue ocean, because it's prime. Like there's nothing out there. There's so much you can do with it and enjoy. And it's like, if you're seeing this kind of vacuum that can be filled in, do it. And all you have to do, you don't even have to put out like the best Trump product out there. You could put out like a crappy bobblehead and you have already cornered the market because you have no competition. And so when we did Thump, we were the first in town and we were the only game. And then because of that, Antarctic Press was like, hey, you guys look like a couple of guys who don't mind having that exposure. You want to work on a Trump comic? And then you had My Hero Macadamia. So then Black Ops, why did we do that? People were complaining about Captain America and G.I. Joe and being like, how come these patriotic heroes don't act patriotic? So they're like, all right, well, let's just do this. So everything that we've done pretty much up until this point, we've just basically picking up a ball that people left behind. And so there's nothing particularly creative or original about what we do. It's just, you guys can do it. What did you say, Mark?
Tim doesn't speak for me. I'm a genius.
Yeah.
As far as writing goes, that's true.
And one of the things I really wanted to point out to that too is that you did use a formula, but the other part of it is that like superhero comic books are formula fiction. They explain the same way as pulp novels and hard-boiled detective stories, and they have their ingrained and necessary tropes. And I know like Black Ops isn't necessarily a superhero comic, but war comics still have those same kind of tropes that fit into them. And so even Larry Hama was riding on the shoulders of Joe Kubert. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
if I could, just a second. One thing that occurs to me, because I've read a bunch of literary works, and no, I'm serious. It's when you read enough of it, and I'll be speaking specifically about like literary comics, they have just as many tropes. And it's their literary tropes or their artistic tropes, but it's like if I have to pick up another memoir that's how I learned what sex was and gave up the religion of my parents, the memoir, just as many tropes. And it's like, well, if I'm going to read tropes, I'd rather just read Spider-Man saving the day than, oh, here we go, here's my first sexual experience, and oh no, I thought about reality for 10 minutes, and I think I've got some interesting questions about the man upstairs. And it's just there is just as many tropes in so-called literary works, and I'm just like, it hit me, or I was just like, you know what, if I'm going to read trope-tastic stuff, and I'd rather read superheroes in spandex.
I mean, it's true. Like everything under the sun has been done before, and that includes in literature. You know, the hero with 1,000 faces, that whole template. That everybody, even if they try desperately to avoid it, it's everything has been deconstructed and worked into a template and worked into a formula. There really isn't any way to get around it.
Well,
there's a point where you should just not let that bother you and just tell the story that you want to tell. Tell a sincere story, because if you just try to subvert things for the sake of subverting them, not because it'll tell the story you want to tell or a good story, you just want to subvert it because like I want to do the opposite of what everybody else is doing, you'll end up with a really insincere and probably terrible story. So.
And I think that's one of the really issues. And that's one of the things that when we first started doing Ideal Comics back in the day, that was one thing that we really isolated, is that every story's been told, right? We're not doing anything new. What we're doing is we're trying to shed a different light on the things that are true, that are underlying believable, right? And I think that's when it comes to writing formula fiction, it's not that we're going to deviate from the formula. It's that we want to illuminate the formula and open it up to a new audience, open it up in a way that maybe hasn't quite been done before, and maybe even use the same formula to ask different questions. Because one of the things that I kind of picked out too is that I don't think that the truth that everything's been done in a story is also true about every other art form, right? So the Beatles didn't invent a new kind of rock and roll music. They just took a slightly different take or combined two different takes on American blues music, right? And that was one of the things. I don't know if you're Beatles fans, but I kind of like them. But they didn't do anything that Buddy Holly wasn't already doing. But Buddy Holly was dead, so they got to be massively famous because Buddy Holly died before people really got to appreciate what it was he was doing. And so John Lennon and Paul McCartney said, "Well, we could do what Buddy Holly was doing," and they did, you know. But
I mean,
Buddy Holly wasn't.
It's the same with like horror movies, you know, like what's really popular right now are horror TV shows like Stranger Things. And I remember one of my coworkers, he's like 40, so he's a few years older than me. He said he didn't like Stranger Things because it was too much like the movies he watched in the 80s, like the Goonies and the Monster Squad and, the It miniseries and, kids team up to fight monster, that kind of genre, which was really popular in the 80s and early 90s. And I'm like, yeah, but, that genre, I mean, that goes back to E.T., that kind of thing. Like, Stranger Things, at least the first season that I watched, like, it's still good. Yes, it's the same genre as the stuff you watched in the 80s, but it's still enjoyable and people like it, even if it does do a lot of the same things. So what's the problem?
I have never seen Stranger Things.
I mean, I thought it was okay. I didn't like it enough to see the second season, but from what I watched in the first season, I was like, this isn't bad.
I saw the first two. The first one's good. I did not care for the second.
Well, and the reason I couldn't even dip my toe into that was because having been a child in the 80s, who is now 42, I watched the promo stuff and I'm just like, dude, don't try to sell me a show by ripping off all the shows I've already seen. It's like
it almost felt like it was felt like it was pandering.
It felt 100% pandering, and I'm just like, I didn't watch Super 8 because it felt like it was pandering, and everyone said it's an amazing movie and you'll love it, and I'm like,
Ready Player One is pandering. Ready Player One,
that sounded like
that. That was Steven Spielberg presents a Steven Spielberg motion picture, a tribute to Steven Spielberg, written by Steven Spielberg, directed by Steven Spielberg. I'm Steven Spielberg. I was like, oh my god, this is just Steven Spielberg jacking himself off.
But it had Mechagodzilla in it.
Oh yeah, it had Mechagodzilla. It also had Chucky, the Ghostbusters, and like every '80s character. And I'm sure Jaws was in there riding a motorcycle, probably. I don't know.
But speaking about Ghostbusters, I want to go off on a slight tangent because Mark, you are a huge Ghostbusters fan. Am I remembering that correctly?
Oh, I am.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and they just had their like 30th anniversary or some such. Yeah,
I think it was like 35th. Yeah,
something like that.
Last year.
I don't want to do math right now, but it was one of those.
Yeah, his 35th anniversary was last year. Yep.
Yeah. So, there are only two movies that I want to see in the theater coming up here. One is the new Ghostbusters, which I'm curious about. And the other one, which is Bill and Ted Face the Music, which I am directly excited about. But I don't even know if it's any good, but I'm going to see it anyway. That was my
the trailer
film.
Looked good. It got me kind of excited for it.
That was my movie in 7th grade. I have to. So, but But yeah, those are the only ones. But I have the somebody was talking to me. We were talking the other day about movies that shouldn't have been cartoon shows that were cartoon shows.
Oh my gosh, there's a
I
lot
don't
of
know
those.
and I have not seen the Ghostbusters cartoon show, so I don't have an opinion about that. But
Oh, wow, the real Ghostbusters.
yeah, but people like it. But but I brought up Beetlejuice because the Beetlejuice movie, which starts being about a ghost who is hired, right, and he's Beetlejuice is a secondary character until the third act, where he shifts into being a sexual predator, and
that movie's so vulgar. I mean, it's 1980s PG, which was allowed to get away with more than modern day PG, obviously. But I mean, there are jokes in that movie where it's like, oh man, that's that part where he grabs his crotch and he goes like, "Hey, nice effing model," like that part. Like, this is a kids movie.
It was not. We got talking about that, and in the conversation, I had a crazy idea, and because one of my kids said, "Well, that would make an interesting crossover," and I said, "Here's how you do it: you have Beetlejuice, like finds his way out, and he possesses a person, and he walks down to the Ghostbusters headquarters, and he hires them to exterminate the Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis ghosts from his house." And that would be the setup for a crossover between Beetlejuice and Ghostbusters. Good idea, bad idea.
No, hold on. Let me just say this, Matt. So let me just say this. Last year, one of the best comics that had come out was Ghostbusters meets Transformers, and it worked 100%. So what you're suggesting is actually more plausible than what we've had so far.
So there's a thing about crossovers is that, there's a dime a dozen of them. It's like the easiest way to make a quick buck is to take two IPs, throw them together, and you can tell when the people making it aren't trying, and you can tell when they are. And like as Tim points out, like Ghostbusters, Transformers, they may have both been from the 80s, but they couldn't have been further apart in premise. But Eric Byrnam, he really made them work on paper. Same thing with the Ghostbusters Ninja Turtles crossovers that Eric Byrnam also wrote. Like he goes in depth on those characters. He does deep character studies and premise studies, and he finds a way to weave them together so it works with their intermeshing narratives, and he keeps them all in character.
So
those are really good. The other end of the spectrum is like when Army of Darkness by Dynamite just started doing nothing but crossovers for like 10 years, and they were all terrible. It was like Ash meets Reanimator, Ash meets Xena Warrior Princess, Ash meets Danger Girl, Ash meets Dracula, Ash meets the Marvel Zombies, and they were all awful. They're just a whole string of crossovers to make a quick buck. They were lousy. But just real quick, the Ghostbusters have met Beetlejuice. They met them at Universal Studios, and it was an entire show at Universal Studios. You can find the footage on YouTube, and I dare you to watch more than 2 minutes of it. It's terrible.
I thought you were gonna say they met in the what was it? The Team Up to Beat Smoking or something? Remember that cartoon?
No,
the cartoon All Stars?
But no.
I was like, oh no.
Slimer did get to meet Garfield, though, so that.
They both like lasagna and hate Mondays.
So I was actually wondering if that was Birnam, because this is totally name dropping. I was going to say it's not, but it is totally name dropping. We have never met, but we were both contributors to the internet DC Comics fan magazine Fanzine about 15 years ago. And Birnam did a series of comic strips, and I was a literary contributor to the magazine. And last week on the show, the editor-in-chief, Mike Hutchison, was one of our guests. And,
cool.
And so, yeah, there's a whole bunch of us that were all big fans, and about half of us wanted to try to break in after the fanzine decided to close its doors, so to speak. And Eric is one of the two that made it big. And the rest of us are not.
Well, I mean, so
his stuff was always super insightful. I mean, he did a humor strip that was in the same vein as Hembeck's stuff Fred
Oh
Hendrick.
yeah,
can
I
see
know
that.
Bob Henbeck. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was his stuff was in the same. It was called Zingers, and it was a DC Comics take, but it was Eric's stuff, and he had just his jokes were just the best because he had that kind of insightful eye to them. So
Birnam, I'm kind of ashamed to say is that I really like his Ghostbusters comic. I've been reading since he started it, and it's aside from when they had to bring in the 2016 cast for a couple story arcs because Sony mandated it. It's a solid run all the way. I've read his Ninja Turtle stuff. He's not one of the main writers in that, but he's done mini series like Secret History of the Foot Clan, and his Turtle stuff is really good. If he has done any creator-owned stuff, I haven't read it, and to be honest, I probably haven't read it because I read intellectual properties that I'm familiar with. Yeah, I'm so normie that way. It usually takes a little bit to get me to try something that does not have name or brand recognition with me. But Birnam, he is impressive with his understanding of existing characters, and that's one thing that is a skill in and of itself. You know, any crappy writer can pick up, jump in on Batman number 700 and say, like, I'm just going to deconstruct everything all the previous writers have done, and I'm going to do my own version of Batman that's totally crazy and has nothing to do with jack shit. So many writers do that. Birnam doesn't do that. He does a deep, almost like psychological dive into the characters. He reads their storylines. He understands their dynamics. And so when he writes them, they always feel authentic. And that's why his Ghostbusters Ninja Turtles was so well, because he worked on both licenses and he understood those characters. And I don't know if he's worked on Transformers prior to the Ghostbusters crossover, but that one was really well because he had such a great understanding of those characters and their continuity and their personality. So he gets a lot of respect from me just from as a writer of licensed comics, because he does so much research and he makes sure he understands the characters so he can write them authentically, which is almost a lost art now.
Well, I gotta say, that's I wouldn't say we're friends. Like I said, we're acquaintances who were in the same circle for like a year and like 3 months, right? So because I was only on the staff for the last several issues. But it was one of those things like that kind of dedication to research was like the spirit of the fan magazine. Like every one of us was somebody who like loved DC Comics history, dug deep about it. We were writing fan fictions about characters that nobody cared about, like the bottom rung characters that we would, like intentionally, like a lot of us, because at the time DC wasn't accepting open submissions, but if you could get a letter in, they would read your stuff, but they never wanted to read anything. They were open about this. Like, do not write Batman. You don't care if you write Batman, and we don't care if you don't care. Give us a take on a character that no one else cares about, and make us care about this character we've forgotten.
Gentleman Ghost.
Well, and I feel like that's how Jeff Johns got his in with DC. And I know that people like to make fun of him, and he has been good, he has been bad, but he did have a lot of really good work, and he did have a lot of great understanding of a lot of those characters. He came in at a time when DC actually celebrated its legacy of characters. They put him on Justice Society with the whole deal.
I love Justice Society.
That's so good. That's the history of DC Comics right there in one ongoing superhero book. And he did a great job on that. When they put him on the Flash, and his whole thing was like this, Wally West is the third Flash. That's a legacy book. And so he really did a deep dive into that. Some characters he didn't really get. I never liked Jeff Johns' Batman because he was at a time when Batman was just a raging asshole for kind of no reason. That was kind of the thing at the time. But Jeff, I think he kind of got tapped out because they had him on like 12 books at once in the 2000s. And I think he just kind of exhausted his creative reservoir. But there was a point when he was just doing a lot of really good work, a lot of really solid work, and showed good understandings of the characters in the 2000s. And then, that was kind of the last hurrah before they started hiring guys like Grant Morrison and
well, Grant Morrison had been there and gone several times.
But
his Suicide Squad in the
up his own ass or something.
Well, here's the ticket with Grant Morrison, because I when Grant Morrison was writing JLA in the 90s was kind of like my I wouldn't say my reintroduction to the Justice League, but it kind of. Because I was paying attention to Justice League back when I started reading comics, because it was like, oh hey, Batman and Guy Gardner, this is really cool. I can dig on that, and it's got Captain Marvel, Billy Batson in it. Sign me up. I am interested for how these characters play together. Little, 12-year-old Reese sitting on the floor of the bookstore in Scotts Bluff, right?
Right.
And,
I got into JLA because his run on JLA was the big deal is that they brought back all the classic JLA characters. Yeah,
exactly.
Batman, Wonder Woman, all them. Yeah.
Right. But so that was one of the things his first 2 or 3 story arcs were really, really good. Rock of Ages sucked.
That was the Grant Morrison. That was like the Batman International type of Grant Morrison, or the Final Crisis. That was like preludes of Final Crisis Grant Morrison, where he's like, I'm just going to be weird and non sequitur and out of chronology for no reason, and you're just going to think I'm a genius. And it's just
right. Because here's what happened: is Grant Morrison's JLA run was super successful. And so they started writing him blank checks continuity-wise, and they took the editorial reins off him. When he started, the editorial reins were really high. They're like, Grant, we know you have great ideas, but this is our flagship. You don't get to screw anyone over. You don't get to ruin anything. And then they started letting him slowly ruin stuff. And a lot of that was he and Mark Waid came together and said, we're going to pitch a story where we get to write whatever we want. We're going to invent a thing called hypertime, which means that everything happens all together and continuity is not so important because you can ignore it or not. Hooray! And it came out through the process of that and through his Seven Soldiers story. And Grant finally revealed that he doesn't read comics. He never researches other people's idea. He read comics as a child and he remembers some things, and that's just what he writes. He writes whatever he feels like. He doesn't feel like he has any labor to research or any reason to love anything anyone else has done. He just sits there being Scottish and smug and writes whatever the hell he wants.
Well, so I'll toss Grant a bone because I
would say I wouldn't mind the Scottish bit.
Yeah,
but I'm not a fan of the smug.
Right. So when I read Super Gods, which is his big opus of comic book history, and so he did do his homework on that, and so he does know his stuff when he chooses to. I don't think he's right about the things that he says. I vehemently disagree with him, and I think he fundamentally misunderstands stuff. But the thing that the thing that pertains to the conversation you guys are talking about is he was talking about how this impression I got, and it kind of seeps through. I think a lot of his work is tone, and it has to do with the fact that as Americans, we tend to treat our superhero stories fairly seriously, even when they're silly. There's a certain tonal kind of this is still we're going to take this guy with a shield and tights. We're still going to take him seriously. We understand on some level that this is kind of farcical, but we're going to take it seriously enough to kind of invest ourselves and to demand a certain level of continuity and respect out of the story. Well, Grant kind of comes in and he says, oh, this is all so silly, so we shouldn't even take it seriously. And so when you get to things like, Batman R.A.P. and a whole bunch of other stuff that he's done, he goes, oh, this is all silly and campy. I'm just going to dial it up to, past 11 and then till past the dial breaks. And here's Batmite blowing things up and, and just going completely crazy with it. And it's again, it's that fundamental misunderstanding of yes, we all understand that it's, in reality, people wouldn't dress up in tights. We understand, right. But we take it seriously enough. But Grant Morrison went goofy with it, and Alan Moore on the other side went crazy creepy with it.
That's the thing. I kind of almost feel like Alan Moore, whether he meant to or not, and knowing how grouchy he is, he probably meant to. He's kind of the guy that ruined comics in a way. Yes. I mean, he wrote some very good ones, but his attitude was he had this dismissive thing. He's I think he always felt like he would rather be writing novels, but he's stuck writing comics. And so he has a thing where, yes, it's silly for a guy to put on tights and jump from rooftops and punch clowns and stuff or whatever, but the characters within the narrative take it seriously because that is their reality. It's serious for them.
Right.
People on the outside looking in can think it's ridiculous, but as long as the characters in the story are taking it seriously, then you don't break that fourth wall. You don't break that immersion. And that's why I have such a hard time. And I got sick of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies and a lot of superhero movies because they always have to have that scene where a character goes oh, yellow spandex. You know, like he would go, you actually go out dressed like this, or you know, like Ant-Man. Can we do something about the name? That's so silly. Where the character always has to wink, wink, nudge, nudge at the audience that they're in on the joke, that all this is crazy, silly bullshit, and that totally breaks the immersion. You know, it breaks the rules of that universe where the characters within the universe aren't taking it seriously. It doesn't matter to them, so why should it matter to us? And I find that so relentlessly obnoxious.
Well, and
It's a very European way of writing superhero comics that I'm just sick of.
Well, and I think part of it is it's not just that. I think that it's not just that they dismiss the rules of the universe. The continuity, especially in Marvel, has intentionally dismissed the rules of its universe since Civil War. Civil War was actually a lore, and I was talking to Twitless about this on the show a while back ago. But Civil War is actually a lore-breaking event where, like, they said, "Oh no, we're going to question the validity of private Americans using their abilities to defend their neighbors and friends in accordance with the law. You don't need that whole idea. It suddenly gets assumed into the fact that you are the gun, so the government gets to regulate you. No, stop it. You don't get to do that.
You bring up a good point. So wasn't Civil War written by Mark Millar?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so and he's not American, right? If I'm not mistaken, he's is he Irish or
he's Scottish as well.
Scottish. Okay, so it something dawned on me, like something just clicked. I have never, with the exception of Garth Ennis, I have never liked any of the British writers, specifically British writers.
Oh, thank you, Tim.
Not a single one. I have never liked a writer, and
it's the
reason
Vertigo
why.
crowd.
Well, it is, but it's also the idea that, and something just clicked with me the other day. So I was listening. I'm not going to say who the YouTuber is. I think Matt was in the chat, so he probably knows what I'm talking about. But there was someone who came on this stream, and it was a German guy, and this guy was he was so snarky, and it just reminded me of, this is why I'm not fond of Europeans, because it was a pervasive attitude where it's like, well, maybe you should not care about Elmer Fudd because you should not be worrying about children's cartoons. You're an adult. And I'm like, you work in cartoons. How can you have that opinion when you are working for the medium? There are so many ways of dismantling the argument, but the one thing, when I spent my time in Europe, the one thing that annoyed me the most was they were so homogenous in their thinking. Like for countries that prided themselves on having like 8 political classes, sure didn't seem like it, because everyone I talked to basically was lockstep a socialist, and they never had wavering opinions on religion, on politics, on family, nothing. They all kind of towed the line. And it dawned on me that the way that these European writers, the way that they have subverted the way that comics are written has always stuck up in my craw, and I've never liked it. I mean, for example, you take like Warren Ellis.
I was just about to bring that up. I was just about to bring up Warren Ellis.
So I think Mark knows where I'm going with this. So right. Warren Ellis. So he was the writer on G.I. Joe Resolute. And if you talk to anyone who's kept up with G.I. Joe over the last 30 years, and you ask them this simple question, what is the name of Snake Eyes' girlfriend? They're all going to tell you the same thing. It's Scarlet. Right? It's always been Snake Eyes and Scarlet. The only time it was Duke was in the first episode of the cartoon where it was referenced. But in G.I. Joe Resolute, there's a part where Scarlet says, like, hey, I just want you to know that I'm going to make a choice, and I choose you, Duke. And I was like, who wrote this script? Because it's obviously someone who hates what they're writing, and they hate the fans enough to have done that. That was an intentional subversion. And I've noticed that is pervasive with all of these European writers. And it wasn't until I like to point out another. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I've listened to a lot of YouTubers recently, and it seems like that's just something I had not noticed until recently. But they all point that out. They're like, "Did you know that this guy hates superhero comics? This guy hates comics." I was like, why does this Vertigo crowd hate comics so much? And what is it about the American crowd? And I think it ties into this kind of stereotype that the majority of comics readers tend to be left-wing. They eat it up because they want that subversion in their writing. They like the undermining of American culture.
I think it's also a lot of the times is that a lot of these people reading Vertigo comics are adults, obviously, and they feel I don't know, they feel embarrassed that they're grown men or women reading comic books. And so like, oh, but no, this comic book is making fun of superhero comics. So it's okay. It's telling me that superhero comics are bad. And they're like, but you're still reading a superhero comic. You're just reading one that's bad on purpose.
Well, and that actually comes back to let's make this a little literary for just a second, so I could get my my weekly chance to sound really hoity-toity, and I'll name
Where's your
drop.
brandy?
I'll get to name drop C.S. Lewis, right? And C.S. Lewis said that when I was young man, I didn't read fairy tales because I felt they were immature. Now that I'm old, I read fairy tales because I was immature. I'm massacring the quote, but the idea that when you're not afraid of proving yourself, then you can enjoy things that are simple.
I thought Lewis said something like, when I was when I became older, I learned that it was okay to embrace childish things, basically, something like that.
That was probably closer.
Right, and I think the real person to blame is, I can't recall her name, but she was the editor at Vertigo, and she was the one who pushed nothing but European writers at Vertigo.
Was it Heidi MacDonald? Was it Heidi MacDonald?
No, it was Carrie. It was Karen Berger.
Thank you. And she's the one who brought in Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison, Mark Millar, Alan Moore, like all of those British invasion, because I think she just thought their accents were hot, so she just brought in nothing but British people.
And I want to step back from that a little bit. First of all, I want to point as far as European writers not getting, I don't think it's just a European thing, because one of the best Batman writers of the 90s was Alan Grant, who was another Scotsman. And
he is really good.
And his Batman is spot on. His Anarchy, of course, I think is phenomenal. It's politically different, but it's great. And another also another Scotsman who really gets superheroes, and still gets those European tropes was Jason. Oh my goodness, his first name, James Robinson, who did Starman.
Chris Claremont. Oh yeah, Chris Claremont. He's British.
Chris Claremont was born in Britain. So you got to give him a couple. But I want to go back and rant about Warren Ellis. Thank you, Tim, for bringing him up, because I do not see why people like Warren Ellis.
He's an edgelord.
Thank you. I don't either.
Oh my gosh.
I read. Hold on. Right before, I'm going to let you launch into it. But
thank you.
I have Next Wave volumes 1 and 2. I don't know why I have them, because I read it and I was like, this is dumb. Like, why in the world was this touted as like why was this touted as like this great work? I was reading it and I just thought, this guy's a hack. Like, I don't like anything about this at all. But go ahead.
So do we need to have before we get on the Warren Ellis thing, because I'll let you, but do we need to have like a show where we just like auction off people's books they don't like anymore?
Yes, we should.
It's just like, okay, so here's the Killing Joke. It's garbage. Who wants it?
No, you should. You should do that. That's a fun idea.
I will say the only Grant Morrison Batman comic that I like is Arkham Asylum, because that's an abstract surrealist horror take on Batman that works with Grant Morrison's like, I'm just going to write a whole bunch of crazy like edgelord bullshit and it's all going to be really weird and abstract. That one worked to his style, even though when you read it, you can see all of his Vertigo edgelord crap, like the Mad Hatter being a pedophile, or there's another one. Oh yeah, it was Two-Face shitting himself. Like, oh, that's so edgy. You think it was written by Warren Ellis because it's so edgelord. But go on. Tell us your Warren Ellis.
I just about embarrassed myself because I was like, oh, didn't Grant Morrison write Batman the Scottish Connection? No, that was Alan Grant with Frank Quietly. It was Frank Quietly doing the art, so it threw me off because I know Morrison and Quietly collaborated on some stuff for Image, but it was Alan Grant, so never mind. But that's also that one is a deep dive into like Scottish like history too, in addition to a bunch of fantastic stuff. Batman the Scottish Connection is awesome. But anyway, there was a ton of great stuff in the chat that I wanted to go ahead and reflect back on. So I got to go find it. First, Fly Fox Pro, friend of mine, Zack Snyder takes it serious. No, he does not. Zack Snyder takes his ideas seriously, but he does not even begin to understand the subject material he's dealing with.
In a way, he takes it too seriously. He's like, oh, if Superman had godlike powers and he got into a fight with Zod, then they would destroy the whole city and they would just knock skyscrapers and everybody. Or, oh, if Batman was really machine guns and shoot everybody. Like, that's his serious take on.
Because here's the thing: he doesn't take seriously. He doesn't take the idea of the Superman seriously. He doesn't take the idea of because what Siegel and Schuster came to is that he's not enough to be the Superman physically. He has to be the Superman morally. And
well, that's
they don't allow. Like, Snyder does not allow.
Hey, I'm waiting to hear. I'm waiting to hear the Warren Ellis rant.
I've got a little bit of what. Wait, let's do chat first, because like we'll
come back around.
I just want to say real quick about your Superman thing. It feels like all modern Superman media is being written or edited by Lex Luthor. The way it just deconstructs. I mean, when I say deconstructs Superman, I mean like literally tears him down. Like Lex Luthor's attitude towards Superman is he believes that no human being can be this morally just, can be this good of a person. And he's wrong. Superman is that good of a person. And that's the whole point. But that's what Zack Snyder and whoever it was that Bryan Singer, who did Superman Returns, they always do these stories where Superman's a bad person.
Well, I don't think that's fair to Bryan Singer. I think
he made Superman a deadbeat dad who let Cyclops raise his son for him.
Right. Except he didn't know. That was the whole thing. Is like Lois kept information from him when he left. So it was. I don't think that's the same situation. That's like Kenny Rogers in The Gambler finds that he's got a 10-year-old kid, and he goes back and takes care of him because he finds out he's got a 10-year-old kid, and that's where Superman Returns ends with. You know.
Well, maybe if we got a sequel, if that movie hadn't been kind of lousy in other ways, then maybe we'd have found out. But Zack Snyder's like that, where he's like, I don't believe that Superman can be that good of a person. So he's going to knock skyscrapers down on people, and he's going to break someone's neck.
The other side of that, too, though, is that Zack Snyder's Superman is an idiot. And that's the problem that really gets me, is like, in the same thing with Christopher Nolan's Batman, except for most of the first movie, is that he's just stupid. Batman is stupid in Dark Knight Rises, and Superman is stupid in Man of Steel and BVS. And I'm tired of superheroes not being smart. If I want to see not smart people, I'll watch myself. I don't, they're supposed to be superlatives of the human potential, and we get idiots. And that's why I don't think Zack Snyder really takes it seriously, because he portrays a superhero that's so dumb that he doesn't even think, oh, the bad guys are chasing me. Maybe I'll move away from all the innocent, squishy civilians.
Well, if they had just put in one, just quick cut of Superman stopping in the middle of the fight in Metropolis and trying to help people, but then Zod interfering and keeping him from helping those people, that would have changed the perspective of everything. It's not that he doesn't want to help these people, it's that Zod won't let him. But no, that would get in the way of the kick-ass fight, so we don't even get that moment.
I don't even think like the killing Zod at the end is the problem. I think it's everything
that came after him killing 10,000 other people first.
it's all of the stuff between there, instead of like Superman running to the edge of town saying, oh, he's going to chase me down, or punching Zod out to the sea, so they have this giant massive fight under the ocean. Can I interrupt really fast? So Flatfrox Pro, you meant Zack Snyder, not Scott Snyder, right? Because that's an entirely different conversation. Although the two of them, which for a minute I thought you were talking about Scott Snyder, and then you guys started talking about Zack Snyder. So we could be completely off where we were supposed to be.
Well, just real quick before we change the next question, you mentioned the Dark Knight Rises and how everybody in that's a fucking moron. Is a freaking moron. And I think the dumbest thing I've ever seen in any movie, and especially for the Dark Knight Rises, this Nolan film where everyone thinks it's so sophisticated and intelligent. You have that part where Commissioner Gordon says, send all the cops into the sewers. Every single police officer, send them all into the sewers. And so every single police officer in Gotham goes into the sewers and gets locked down there. It's like, really? All of them? Even like the dispatch officer and the SWAT team? And
send the secretary in.
I hadn't even picked up on that.
It's so dumb. And they did that. It's such a stupid plot device just to facilitate the lawlessness. There's no no cops in Gotham thing, so they could do their little no man's land story, butchering. And it's like they had to come up with the stupidest plot point, and everyone still treats those movies like they're genius, like they're like high tier Criterion Collection quality films. Like, no, this is really dumb.
The Metal had a really good comment here. Many more contemporary European heroes were servants of authority, knights and lords, etc. In America, we value lone cowboys that stroll into town, solve problems, and leaves. That's an excellent observation, and it also is one of the big things that separates Japanese superheroes from American superheroes. I've had the conversation several times about the difference between the genres, and I think that's a really poignant example. Is that by nature, we are not supposed to trust our government, whereas the rest of the world looks to the government for the salvation. And that is as it should be reflected in our heroes, which is one of the other reasons that Civil War was a lore-breaking idea. Spider-Man, the idea that Spider-Man would sign up with Tony Stark's, that is obviously Millar doesn't understand anything about the character.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up because when we were coming up with Common America, originally we were just going to be like a American superhero comic book. And then Tim came up with the name Common America. And then once he brought in, like Kamen Rider, like a tokusatsu thing, like that opened up the doors where we can make it a mishmash of American and Japanese superheroes. And that was one thing that I did notice about Japanese superheroes in the tokusatsu genre is that you have like a Sentai team, or Power Rangers, the Americanized version. They always have a Zordon. They always have a big floating head that tells them what to do. They have an authority that gives them directions. If you have even like Ultraman, which I'm watching through right now, even though he's technically a lone hero, he's always a part of a team that's usually a military or government institution like the Science Patrol or the Ultra Guard or whatever. Yep. They're always part of some sort of network of authority. They're never the Batman who's just off by themselves. And even if you look at contemporary Japanese parodies of American superheroes like My Hero Academia, they're literally in a school learning how to be superheroes for the government, essentially. Yeah.
I will bring up that there is the idea of the Ronin, which is the guy, which is very similar to the Western idea of the gunslinger, which is why those ideas often mesh so well. Which is the masterless samurai swoops into town and solves a problem and leaves. So that I think that's why Western culture and Japanese culture specifically get along so well genre wise, is because there is some really common bond.
Well, there are the Yojimbo character, from the Kurosawa film, or just Usagi Yojimbo, is Miyamoto Usagi by Stan Sakai, or Lone Wolf and Cub. It's a cliche, I guess, in Japanese literature.
Even within the context of My Hero Academia, there's the spin-off series Vigilantes, which
I love.
Freaking love.
I like it better than I like Vigilantes better than the main story. Yeah.
I think it's more compelling because there's not the same level of politics in it.
Well, and the stakes are a little bit different too, because for example, and you can this is like a thing for another show completely. We should get Marmaduke fan on. But for example, My Hero Academia is interesting for a couple of reasons. And one of the things I like observing is whenever Mark and I are doing conventions and we meet someone who's a fan of My Hero Academia, I'll ask them, who's your favorite character? If they're at that line where you're not sure how old they are because they're like in their 20s and 30s, you'll always know based on what they answer. If they say that they like Deku, chances are they're more in their 20s. If they say All Might, they're definitely 30 and older. Because in All Might, they see kind of like the iconoclast Superman, Captain America type character, whereas Deku is more appealing to kind of a younger reader who can empathize with that more. But I mean, Mark and I don't like Deku because he's crying all the time and whatnot. Like he's insufferable. And one of the reasons why I like Vigilantes so much is in Vigilantes you have the Crawler. Sorry, the Crawler is the main character in Vigilantes, and his power is terrible. He's basically like a hockey puck that just goes across the floor. He has like one of the weakest quirks imaginable, but he doesn't whine about it. He's basically just there to help his community, and in my opinion, he's kind of the perfect blend between Deku and All Might in that he's a weak central character, but he has a very good heart, and that his character actually it shines through opinion a lot truer than in Deku's case, who I haven't been able to relate to at all.
And I think that's definitely a good observation. So back to the chat quick. Neo Star said the Watchmen led to the fetishization of deconstructing superheroes. Everyone wants to deconstruct a hero but never build them back up. And I agree with this 100%. I also believe that part of it is that I think people fundamentally misunderstand, and I think Alan Moore may as well, but misunderstand the what's really going on in Watchmen, because Alan Moore did a brief reconstruction of the genre on the last 3 pages, where we demonstrate that his least favorite character, the Objectivist, was the correct one and the true one, and everyone knows it. But everybody in the story, but it's
that book where everybody got the wrong idea after they read it, and everybody's been trying to do their own Watchmen ever since. And it's like, well, let Watchmen be Watchmen and do your own thing. But yeah, like you said, everybody's trying to deconstruct and they don't know how to rebuild.
So I would say that's also kind of a I know we've been ratting on the British writers a bit, and I do want to get to Warren Ellis, but one thing I've noticed is I was watching a whole bunch of the classic Star Treks, like the original series, and so this was an American TV show, and when you take the character Spock, and the amount of times where guest writers, because they had lots of like Warren. Was it Harlan Ellison?
Harlan Ellison.
He wrote an episode. A whole bunch of other people, lots of legends of sci-fi were writing episodes left and right for Star Trek, and it seemed like it was very clear who the character of Spock was, but yet every new writer who got him, at least every other one, was like, how can I break this character? Because Spock is supposed to be emotionless, and the amount of times that I was like, if you made a drinking game out of the amount of times Spock acts out of character, you would die. And even though he's known for being logical and emotionless, every other episode, a writer would find some way of either injecting him or having somebody psychically control him or having him be on his Vulcan period, which actually happens. Yeah. And it's just I think part of it is that when you are a writer, and some of it is like it's like a spirit of rebellion. It's like, this is what this character is, and it's like, well, I bet I can make him do something he's not supposed to do. And it's just something that happens when you're handed someone else's toy, and sometimes you get some people who really know how to respect it or don't want to change things, and sometimes you get people who really want to experiment, and that's kind of okay. But then you get people who are just like, I want to break this. How can I break it? And it's just. And having been, done some writing, and I'm sure you guys know it too. Sometimes there's this temptation to take something and because you want to make it yours, because you want to leave your mark on it, you go and you try to do something crazy, I guess.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's it's weird to me because as somebody who's, I guess maybe I write because I'm a fan of the genre, right? So the idea that you would want to break the toys and not leave them for future generations is a strange thing to me. But I also know that that's just something that we see happen again and again and again. And I don't know if, and maybe it's not I tend to say I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the precepts of the genre, but it might just be a disrespect for those precepts.
Well, a lot of superhero writers now, they have the same attitudes, obviously, in a lot of ways, as politicians. No one wants to be a lame duck writer. No one wants to just, stay the course and write, your standard Spider-Man comic. No, I want to be J. Michael Straczynski, and I want to say that Spider-Man actually got his powers magically because he's the magical spider totem. And so now we got this character who's going to go around and he eats, and he's searching for all the different animal totems. Turns out all of his animal villains are also animal totems. And then it wasn't Straczynski, but it was around that time another writer was like, I'm going to have Spider-Man get mutated into a giant spider, and then he's going to give birth to himself, and his new body is going to have all sorts of crazy new powers and shit like that. It was like, yes, you're telling an unorthodox and lore-breaking, as you put it, Spider-Man story that's going to forever be known as your Spider-Man story, your version of Spider-Man. But the next writer is also going to tear that down anyway, so it really didn't matter. but you're also going to be known as the guy who wrote the story that made Spider-Man's origin magical, and that he's a spider totem. Or you're going to be the one who wrote the story where Spider-Man gives birth to himself, and now he's got organic web shooters. I mean, is that really, or would you rather be, I don't know, one of those guys in the 80s who wrote a lot of really good Spider-Man stories that I'm reading right now in the Epic collections that are solid? J.M. DeMatteis, you know, someone like that who wrote in the 90s who writes all these really good Spider-Man stories. They're very typical Spider-Man stories, but it's also what makes them good.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean,
And
Dixon had the exact same situation with his Punisher, with his Batman, with his Nightwing, with his Robin. They're definitive stories. They stand the test of time. They're great literature. I mean, comic book literature. It's not like Lord of the Rings, but it was good stuff, and you can't get around that whole thing. And I don't know. I think that's the defining. That's Alan Grant, Chuck Dixon. Those are guys that they're the reason I'm into comics. Right? Is their kind of stuff. So. I think that's something that gets on that. I do want, once again, back to the chat, the metal picked up more Robin Hood, less Knights of the Round Table. I don't think Knights are bad, but I definitely that distrust for government, the desire that it's the same kind of thing that Zorro's, the Shadows, they're in the lineage of the American superhero in a way that the Arthur's Knights are not. And I think that's
Robin Hood was a socialist. He robbed from the 1% to give back to the rest of us.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't. He robbed from the government because of unjust tax law.
That's right.
I know, it's just stupid people that they know that one line, rob from the rich and give to the poor, but they don't actually know the rest of the story and what rich he robbed from. There's like, oh, just, go kick in your neighbor's door because they have a bigger TV than you and take it. That's their interpretation of
the tax collector.
So, okay, I can't find the next comment, so go ahead with the anti-Warren Ellis rant.
See, I feel like it's been built up, and now I'm gonna let you guys down.
That's okay.
No, but
let us down. Try really hard.
I'm gonna let you down so hard. Oh, you have no idea. So anyway, I remember just having Warren Ellis talked up as if he were respectful of the legacy of superheroes because of things like Planetary and the Authority. And then when I went back and I went and read those things, I was like, not only is this not respectful, it is like dancing on the grave of the things he's supposedly trying to celebrate. This is not respectful at all. So like, what was it? There's this scene where the Authority are fighting, I think it's Fu Manchu basically, or his version of Fu Manchu. And they squish him with their giant ship. And they're like, oh, did you hear that sound? That sounded like a fart. That was his castle getting squished. And I'm like, well, that's respectful of this pulp character that you're using. And then all of Planetary, the entirety of Planetary, is literally them discovering how all of the superheroes have been murdered and they're dead, and they're archaeologists, and they're supposed to be celebrating the superhero tradition, but all they're doing is looking at like the skull of the Hulk and the skeleton of Godzilla and the skeletons of all these other pulp characters. And at the end of it, they beat up the Fantastic Four, and it's like, we're celebrating superheroes, and it's like, you've celebrated nothing. You're celebrating a corpse. And then to top it all off, after all of that, Warren Ellis was not. He like moved into an entirely new medium to ruin, because it was like, leave my video games alone, but they let him write freaking Castlevania in the.
Oh my gosh! You just blew my mind. I completely forgot that he wrote the script for that. I have a huge rant about that too, because that's like one of those unpopular opinions where I'm like, I hated the Netflix Castlevania, and people are like, what? How do you hate the Netflix Castlevania? I was like, okay, so this is something that Mark and I were both taught by a friend of ours. We had a friend who he graduated from UCLA Law, and I attribute this quote to him. I don't know if he took it from somewhere else, but he always says, you always know a good writer after you read a work and you walk away learning more about the characters. You know that there's a bad writer when you walk away learning more about the writer, because it means that the work was just a talking head or a vehicle for the writer's opinion, and not something that actually elucidated the characters themselves. And when I was watching Castlevania, a lot of things stood out for me. One, it was very anti-religion, And it was funny because there's this part that's so comically bad where basically these priests show up at Lisa Tepish's house and they're like, "What is this satanic instrument?" And it's a microscope. And they're like, "This is the work of the devil." I'm like, oh my gosh, who wrote this thing?
Warren Ellis.
But the thing that really shocked me, the thing that I found most glaring about it was that if you look at the manuals for Castlevania, specifically Castlevania 3, there is actually a preface that states the mission of the Belmonts was that they were actually summoned by the Eastern Orthodox Church to stop the evil of Dracula and his satanic minions. Go. That is the plot of Castlevania. It is good versus evil. It is the noble Belmont clan and their descendants fighting an eternal war against Dracula. And in Castlevania, I don't even know how they gave this guy permission to do this. The moment I heard it was Warren Ellis doing the script, I was like, oh dear God, like here we go. And not even 3 episodes in, I just thought Trevor's an alcoholic. Like people are being slaughtered across the countryside. He has to be coerced into fighting. And if you remember the opening of Castlevania 3, the video game, it's this epic opening where it's like lightning in the Wallachian mountains and Trevor Belmont is like there, a shadowy figure, and he tosses the cloak away, and when the game starts, he's ready to kick some ass. That's Castlevania.
So
like I don't get this.
Well,
even if you go with the big opening of Symphony of the Night and the American translation of it, which has Dracula utter the line, "Perhaps the saying could be said of all religions," but they let it sit, and it was Dracula who was saying it, and they let you kind of interpret as you wanted. It was still Dracula bad, Richter good, and Dracula's making some sort of like world weary statement, but like they just moved past it. But one thing about Castlevania the show that was so mind-bogglingly stupid that no one will acknowledge is the fact that Dracula represents knowledge and science. At the very beginning, he's like, "I'm a scientist, but I'm also a vampire who has a magic castle, and magic is totally real." And then they portray the church and the religious people as superstitious. Well, if they're superstitious, then their superstitions would not be real. But then at the very end of the series, is it Trevor? I think he says, "You guys can make holy water, right?" And
yes, exactly.
Clearly acknowledging that the religious stuff is real, which means that the church people can't be superstitious.
They have this really stupid part where Sypha says that, we're the enemies of God. And like, you're the enemies of God, but you can make holy water and you can do all these religious things. If you were the enemies of God, he wouldn't let you do that because it's his power that you're using.
The religion it wouldn't be real. It would be science. It would be if you're going to go. So they couldn't pick. If they wanted to go with the science explanation, then Dracula would have to have like an actual disease, and his powers would have to be like a virus, and his castle would actually be like technology. But no, when it's convenient to the script, it's magic. And when it's convenient to be mean to the Catholic Church, it's superstition. You can't have it both ways. And yet I'm sitting there going, and this is supposedly like a giant of pop culture writing, and he can't even like.
Well,
oh Lord.
And then, so real quick, because the jump off that, Mark pointed it out to me too, because I watched it first, and then Mark watched it, and he showed me, because Mark's the writer, I'm just the monkey. But Mark pointed out the fact that even in their dialogue, the characters don't talk the way that they should, even in the show. Like, for example, Alucard, fairly close to the source material. He's kind of that aloof, son of Dracula. He just wants to be left alone. But there's this part where like he and Trevor will talk to each other, and it's like, "Fuck you, asshole. Yeah, screw you, man." And I'm like, why are they talking like they're talking like surfer guys from California?
And
like,
that's what drove me crazy. I was going to bring that up because it's so inconsistent. Because Ellis will write this dialogue that is very ornate and flowery, and it feels of the era, where Alucard will be doing this big soliloquy, and he'd go like, "Hey, bro, fuck you, like eat shit, dog." And like, there's this one really dumb part where, and it's just edgy. It feels like it's stepped out of Family Guy. Like there's a part where Sypha says like, "I could like piss in a bucket and tell him that it's beer," and like that's not funny. That doesn't even sound like something a character at that time would say. But Ellis will do that where and it's kind of frustrating because you can see glimpses of Ellis trying when he's writing this other dialogue, but then he slips into next wave mode, which reminds me. So Ellis, another thing he doesn't do is he's the kind of guy who feels like, I don't even want to check his social media because he seemed very reactionary. So when Mark Miller did that scene in the Ultimates with Captain America pointing, at his head and saying like, "Does you think this letter stands for France?" He did it. Ellis got so incensed by that he did a joke in Next Wave where Elsa Bloodstone is wearing a T-shirt with the EU symbol on it, like all Europeans wear apparently, and she points at the EU symbol when she's yelling at somebody, and says like, "Do you think this letter on my shirt stands for America?" And that was supposed to be Ellis getting even with the evil Americans who made that anti-France joke, but Mark Miller is Scottish. He's getting angry at Americans for a joke a Scottish person wrote, and he's writing a retort to that. Yeah. It's like you were
of course,
so reactionary.
That whole setup in Ultimates is just to make Captain America look like an asshole anyway.
Exactly. I mean,
that's all Millar does is I
and
can't stand
Ultimates should not be a template for what they need to be.
I kind of like the Ultimates.
That's because you're a millennial idiot.
No. As an alternate universe thing, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed Jerkwad America as an alternate, not as the mainstream. If you'd done that to mainstream, but as an alternate take, I kind of liked it.
So the only memories I have of the Ultimates that are positive is I thought it was a comedy, and I enjoyed it as a comedy, like a parody or a satire of an alternate universe satire of Avengers comics. But so many people took it seriously, and they're like, "This is what an Avengers movie should be like. It should be based on the Ultimates." And like, oh god, no.
So okay, so here's other than I didn't care for, I thought he got missed the spirit of every single character in there, and he tried doing like what Norman Lear wanted Archie Bunker to do, but didn't have the heart to make him. If that was Captain America, right? Because Norman Lear was trying to, I don't know if you guys know this, he was trying to lampoon his father, right? But he couldn't do it, and he ended up making Archie Bunker the hero. Like, Archie Bunker is right about everything.
Oh,
right?
so it's like Alan Moore and Rorschach. Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So like Archie, he's a good husband. He's a loving father. He keeps going to work. Lets the Meathead live in his house. Meathead divorces his wife. Archie, loses his wife. Gloria goes off to be a strumpet, just like Archie warned her that it was going to happen. Archie ends up adopting a Jewish girl, orphan, and taking care of her, buying a business with his retirement, taking care of all this stuff. And Archie's the hero, and he was correct. His way of living was the right way to live, and the Meathead was a liar and a son of a bitch. And like that's how the whole opus ends, with Archie being right. And because Norman Lear couldn't lie about his dad. And that was the whole thing. But the story he was trying to tell is who Captain America was in the Ultimates. That's the guy that Norman Lear wanted Archie Bunker to be, to justify his like hippie dishonesty. And that was the whole thing. And that's why I couldn't, I mean, like, it's consistent. It's not like Millar's like, a hack writer. It's that he missed everything. And the worst thing, it's not the worst, but it's one of my pet peeves, was the Sam Jackson Nick Fury.
Yeah.
Because Nick Fury is supposed to be a counterpoint to Captain America. So Nick Fury has been through the 20th century and everything that happened, and his take is more jaded because he's seen America become retarded. Whereas Captain America is supposed to emerge from the ice and be like, no, we can be awesome. And Nick Fury's like, you really think so? And that's supposed to be a clever conflict between the characters. And instead, we just get Jules with less swearing.
Okay,
and I like Jules, but that's not Nick Fury.
So let me again, okay, boomer, since you called me a millennial idiot. No,
Thank you. I'm a very young Gen Xer, but screw you.
Okay. Anyway, no, I will say that kind of like how Rorschach was intended to be this awful jerk who you're supposed to not like and approve of, but he turned out to be the most awesome character that you just wanted to see more of. because like that's how that worked. Like that kind of ended up being the way Captain America in the Ultimates was, for me at least. He was just so, again, he was so like cool and like did not give a damn. And so again, not in mainstream would I appreciate that, but in this alternate take when he's like, do you think this A stands for France? I was like, lol. Like and it was just like, you know, like a guy like, because they made him much more like jingoistic, like hardcore military, you know. And I was like, you know, I could see a you know, a Jughead being totally being like talking shit, talking crap like this. And it, like, I don't know, I'm not saying it's like, again, the best thing ever. In fact, if I went back and read it, I don't know how it would age, because when I first read it, I really appreciated Brian Hitch's art. That was one of the main reasons what drew me to it. I would say that over time, I like Brian Hitch less. I don't like him nearly as much as I used to, but there was something really epic in scope in some of those works, very cinematic, and in comics,
I think Greg Land has made me dislike Brian Hitch, because Greg Land just looks like a bad Brian Hitch, and that makes me like not like, because when I see Brian Hitch, all I can think of is Greg Land. Even though Brian Hitch is doing a good job, he's not tracing magazine photos. The coloring style, the visual, it looks like Brian Hitch. That attempt at a photorealism because you're tracing photos.
And I will say this about the Ultimates. So I don't mind it at all. I actually revisited it not too long ago. Ultimates Volume 1, Issue 1. I think for a lot of people that really cemented into their heads kind of the legacy of Captain America, because Issue 1 is basically just him being frozen into ice, and it's this really, really good kind of very serious scene where he, you know, it's him storming the Nazi bunker and showing how he got encapsulated. I think that still will go down in at least comic book history as a seminal moment, introducing the Avengers to kind of like a new generation. But the one thing I will say about Mark Millar is anything that he might have done that was awful in Ultimates 1 and 2 cannot compare to what Jeff Loeb did in Ultimates 3, which is a travesty. So I mean,
Ultimatum, which,
and that too, and Ultimatum, and so that, so you know, people have heard me ratting on the English this whole stream, but the reality is that I think that they were kind of the precursor for a lot of American writers who came in right afterwards, and at least the British writers had kind of a flowery language and prose that they used to make their works seem a lot more intelligent. But the American writers who have followed suit, a lot of them have really bombed in terms of obviously the legacy that they've picked up. And Jeff Loeb taking over the Ultimates in Volume 3 and Ultimatum, it's a garbage fire. It's absolutely terrible.
The sad thing about Jeff Loeb is that, oh gosh, it's, I always want to like every time I want to rail against Jeff Loeb, I'm always reminded of the fact that I'm like, I think his life just got turned upside down when his kid died, and I don't know, I don't know what that did to his writing, but I would assume it did something.
It's the thing is, like, when you look at the timeline, I mean, Jeff Loeb had written good to decent to okay stuff. Like he wrote like Batman: The Long Halloween, which is a good retelling of Two-Face's origin. Dark Victory wasn't so good, but it was all right. It was readable. He wrote the Haunted Knight one-shots. That they were honestly, Batman one-shots are pretty good. He wrote what was he wrote like Daredevil Yellow and Superman Blue, and he wrote a bunch of those things, and they're good reads. Then his son died. And then he started doing like the Superman Batman, which was really bad. That's new origin for Supergirl. And he did those Ultimates books that were really bad. And I think he lost his zest for life, and that impacted the quality of what he was writing. And you kind of you want to pull your punches when you're criticizing his work, but that doesn't change the fact that his work is still bad.
So I have a question on all of that, because I noped out before Volume 2 of Ultimates. I read the first one when it was online free, and I was like, no, you get no more of my time. And that was the same time like the Ultimates and Ultimate X-Men, and I was just like, you're doing what with Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch?
Yeah.
And then of course the Ultimate Spider-Man, I was never impressed with the Ultimate Spider-Man.
Me neither.
Boring. It was so boring.
Well, and here's part of why it was boring for me. Is that I had just a couple of years before they had released the Spider-Man saga, right? Which was like the 4-issue, like double-sized retelling of Peter Parker's entire life. So I had just downloaded all of that stuff into my brain junior year in high school, right? And it was great stuff, and I loved it, and I thought it was a neat epic scope, and watching the boy become a man and all that kind of stuff that I was in the middle of in my own life, so I kind of internalized that. And then people are like, oh, it's Spider-Man for new generation, and it's all different, and it's great, and we can do anything we want. And it's the same story told less efficiently than Lee did it, and
no
way
kidding.
less efficiently than I had read. And it's just note for note. Oh, except Green Goblin's a monster this time. Oh, how different.
He got to date Kitty Pryde.
You know, and that's
I
the
like
thing
that.
too. Oh God, and Kitty Pryde is just super Jewish in that, because apparently that's the only thing Bendis knew about her, was that she's Jewish.
Oy vey.
Oh, we gotta be late for Seder, Peter. We gotta go. Oh, I'm you know, but no.
No, I quit reading before that. Was she Fran Drescher? Or what was
Fran
the-
Drescher, yeah,
That was a nice nanny impression.
yeah, they're all from. I mean, they're all from New York. So, but no, I read Volume 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man, and the fact that he didn't put on the Spider-Man costume until, what was it, the last page of issue 4 in his
I thought
sixth
it was
issue.
6. I thought
It
it
was.
was
Oh God, was it the last issue of the number?
I haven't read it in 20 years. I could be wrong.
I know, but it took so long for him to become Spider-Man. I'm like, you know, Amazing Fantasy did it in 8 pages. Like, why is this taking you 5 or 6 issues for him to put on the goddamn suit?
So
like,
we can really care. We can really care that, you know, Uncle Ben cacks it, because we didn't care before. I mean, it's not like
that's kind of not the
Yeah. And then the thing is this. So you bring up a good point, Matt. So the reason I didn't like it, and I only picked up, I think I didn't even finish the origin. I think I stopped at issue 2 or issue 3. Ironically, I hate the series, but I think issue 1 goes for a lot of money right now on eBay. But anyway, one reason I hated it is, you know, like you said, the argument was, no, it's great because it's a new Spider-Man for a new generation. Look at Uncle Ben, he's a hippie. Isn't that cool? Look at Peter, he's jaded and edgy. And I'm like, okay. Then years later, the Spider-Man movie comes out with Sam Raimi, which is pretty much taking the original incarnation of Peter Parker, depicting him pretty much as he would appear in the 2000s, haircut and all. And Uncle Ben doesn't look like the hippie Uncle Ben. He looks like Uncle Ben from the 1960s, except obviously he's wearing contemporary clothing. So this whole notion of contemporizing something by using these visual shorthands, like making Uncle Ben a hippie, because, you know, we got to be up with the times or whatever. No, there's just no excuse for it, and it was proven in the Raimi film.
Well, and one of the things about that's nuts, right, is that like is that it's insulting to me personally, and I know I'm not the measure of all things, right? But when I started reading comic books and I started digging into like the lore and the history, and I was like, dude, I like latched onto the Justice Society, right? I came into the post-crisis universe, and I'm sitting here, and there's, you know, 80 years of history and this lore, and it goes back to the Old West and everything that DC did with the New Earth stuff. And I'm just like, I want to read. You know, they had the JSA series that came out, and I was just like, that Mike Parabek did the art on, and I just absorbed all of this stuff, and I'm like, I want to know about Dr. Midnight, and I want to know about the Hawkmans and how they're all connected, and it was a trash fire, and I want to know about stuff. So like, man, when Starman came out and it tied into all that kind of stuff, dude, like that was speaking my language, right? So then, and the same thing, like I picked up the Spider-Man when I started dipping my toe into Marvel, and I picked up the Spider-Man saga because I want to know the big Mitchnerian story of the Marvel universe and how Captain America ties into all of this. And ooh, Namor's been alive and operating this whole time, and oh man, this is groovy stuff. And so then they're like, oh hey, we're going to tell a story that's hip for the kids. And I'm like, I'm the kids and you stop.
And that's true. I mean, Spider-Man came out in what, 1965 or something like that. And he's been appreciated. The original classic Spider-Man has been appreciated by kids for going on almost 60 years now. Mm-hmm. Peter Parker has never stopped being approachable. The classic Peter Parker has never stopped being identifiable and approachable to children. But now everyone's pushing to get rid of him and like replace him with Miles Morales. Mm-hmm. You know, like, no, we need a new Spider-Man for a new generation. Here's Miles Morales. He has no personality. That means he's a template, and you can just project yourself right onto him because there's nothing there. Like, well, I don't mind the idea of the Miles character.
I think there's some fun to be told with it, but my problem is I honestly think that they're too chicken to actually do it.
Of course they are. It's Disney. Have you heard of the So there's a trope that Mark cued me in on, and once you know it, you'll never unsee it. But it's the trope of the last minute lesbian. So it's and it happens a lot in Disney stuff. So it's the idea that you watch something and it's like, oh, it's all well and good, all well and good. Last minute, last episode, you find out that two characters are lesbians. And in my opinion, that's the most chicken shit thing that you can do, because it's basically like you don't have the guts to just do it on the front end. You're too scared of your audience, so you have to shoehorn it in the back. And I think that it shows not only a duplicitousness on the sake of the writer, it also shows bad writing, because it's the idea that nothing would cue you in onto it, but you still felt like you should Trojan horse it.
Because if it's the last episode, it doesn't matter anymore. The show's already canceled, so it's not like there can be any backlash. So you're not actually taking a risk. And Greg Wiseman, he does that a lot, where after a show gets canceled, he'll do like a Comic-Con interview, and he's like, oh yeah, this character, Lexington from Gargoyles, he was gay the whole time. He pulls like a Dumbledore, you know? Or he'll say like, oh, this character from Spectacular Spider-Man, oh, he was gay. And like, well, okay, absolutely nothing he did in the show even alluded to his sexual preference. Like, yeah, but he was gay. Like, you're just picking a character out of a hat after the show has been canceled, and then everybody claps for you at the Comic-Con for being so bold and brave when you actually did not risk anything because the show's already over.
The funniest Babylon Bee article I saw in the last week was J.K. Rowling reveals that the reader was gay the whole time.
That's an older one, but that is a good one. Yeah. Well, the thing is, the best thing about the Babylon Bee articles is they're kind of evergreen. Yeah. Like, I went on a tear a few weeks ago, like just looking at their suggested ones, and I was reading a bunch of them, and I just shared a bunch to Twitter, and I'm like, wait, these are all from 2016.
It's they
had one. Now this one is kind of topical, but it's still funny regardless of where you're doing it. But it was the Chicago PD has put down Scruff McGruff, McGruff the crime dog. They put him to sleep.
Yeah. So, but anyway, man, we have really. Oh, hey, somebody's in the private chat.
Uh-oh.
Oh, sorry, that was me. I was just
sharing somebody else's video on my channel. What the hell's wrong with you?
Oh, so much. No, it was the J.K. Rowling, discovering you are gay thing. It was really funny. There's a really funny channel called Surreal Entertainment, and they did a really funny goof on that.
Oh, that's funny. I'm going to drop that in the regular chat. That's worth sharing with everybody.
I got to ask you a question, Reese.
Yes.
Reese, Matt. So one of the things I wanted to not necessarily discuss in whole with Common America, but something I wanted to touch base on was, I remember how the last time you and I talked, and I think Mark was there too, I was telling you about how I think someone like you would kind of appreciate some of the things that we worked into the plot that we thought that people with inside baseball knowledge would know about and would actually get a little bit more enjoyment out of, because they're in on the joke. And because you've read, since we've talked, you've since read it, and we haven't had a chance
4
to
times.
discuss it.
It's great.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll tell you. So I was having lunch with Mark last weekend, and I was telling him about this one negative review that we got, and the negative review was by a guy who is like, quote unquote, not on our side, someone who is on the opposing side. And I don't mean the SJWs, I mean other people. But there's a part that it was a negative criticism, but I think it elucidated so much about what I was telling you about. So it's a part towards the end where he's like, okay, I know that in this newscast, he's trying to make a joke about this guy that I like. But the reality of it is that I don't think this is right, because this guy's the villain. And I told Mark, I said, that shows how good your writing is, because you could see the cognitive dissonance, because he's like, wait a minute, he's attributing this thing that this guy I like did to the bad guy. That makes it bad. I'm like, no, it's bad because it was bad. That's why we put it on the villain. The fact that you're seeing it and attributing it to the guy that you like means that we did a good job of equivocating two actions together. It's your fault for seeing something in there that we did not explicitly say.
Well, so I wouldn't even say that it's a fault issue. I mean, that's one of those things where Because okay, so here's part of the thing: knowing a lot of the background stuff and looking into and doing the research and spending hours and hours watching old live streams to see if I was going crazy.
Right, and you weren't.
I'm not. I may have been crazy, but I'm not going crazy. I did see and hear the things I thought I saw and heard. Anyway, even knowing all of that, like the first time I read through, there was probably 2 or 3 little things that I noticed, and I was like, but like the story is so concise and it doesn't at all read like a propaganda piece. It doesn't at all read like some sort of like, oh, he's really sticking it to so and so. It's consistent. It feels like a collected whole. It's part of its own thing. And so that's like part of why I said like I read it like 4 times, because I was just wanting to go through and kind of absorb the whole piece and then look for more of that kind of stuff, because it really was between the lines in a lot of ways. Some of it was pretty obvious, like I know you mentioned on stream before that chickens are really big this year. They're gonna be huge, and like the publicist, a lot of his stuff was a little bittersweet because
and again, it's a funny thing because so for example, if we wrote a character to be, I don't know, a thief, they rob a bank, and then someone says like, he's robbing a bank, that reminds me of this YouTuber I like. It's kind of like, what? I mean,
how was that our fault?
How was that our fault? Because you're seeing in the robber something in someone else that we did not point out. And so I think that's where Mark's writing is helpful, because in that same review, this guy, I don't know, he spent it was a long review, but he was pointing out things that he said were faults of ours. I'm like, no, you completely got that wrong. Like he was saying like, I don't know how I feel about this. I think Common America is anti-capitalist because she turns down the agreement. Like, why would you turn down a 6-figure deal with McDonald's? I'm like, you are completely reading this wrong because at this point, you're trying to project into our work and extrapolate from something that we did not intend. And the fact that you're seeing things in it that we did not purposefully put in there that no one else is seeing except you means that now we're it's almost like it's playing a joke on that type of reader, where it's like you're getting out of it only what you want to, not what was intended by us.
What you're doing, Tim, is you're living rent free.
Yeah, right.
Well, Mark is living rent free. He wrote it.
What you ought to do there is sublet, and then you get that way you can make money on both sides.
So the first thing Tim and I do, when Tim and I decide to start plotting, Common America 2 or Black Ops 3 or whatever, the first thing we do is we settle on what the theme of the story is going to be. What is the substance of the story? What are we trying to say? What's the point of it? That we call it, what's the point of this story? And we kind of roll all those things into one. And so when we did Common America 1, we had our themes to that story. It's about a character who's at a crossroads in life and is trying to figure out what to do. And she basically has to nail down her moral compass because so many different people are attracting her or pulling her in different directions. And the publicist character of Lansky, he fit that narrative. We didn't start our narrative out as like, we're going to make this story because we want to stick it to so-and-so. No, we made our story because we wanted to tell this specific story about this character, Carly. And then this villain character just happened to fit into the themes of that story. And like right now, I finished the script on Common America 2, the first draft, and I sent that to Tim, and he's going to read it and give me his notes. But we're already doing our plotting on Common America 3, and we're already like, well, the first email that I sent to Tim on that was like, so Tim, these are the themes that I think Common America 3 needs to be about. This is the direction that I think this character should go in. This should be the lesson. This is the point of Common America 3. And then we're going to build the details and the architecture of the story itself from those themes. And that way it feels like it has substance to it. It has some sort of weight. It has a point.
I just want to say, just apropos of nothing, that this is to both of you, I guess, specifically to Tim's artwork. But there is something. This is going to come out weird, so I'm just going to say it anyway. There's something bittersweet about Common America, and it's this. It's the fact that her design and the way she just looks and kind of pops off the page. She's everything that Carol Danvers She reminds me of everything that Carol Danvers was in terms of her character. And that's so amazing and awesome, and I love it. But it also makes me so sad for how much that character has lost over time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yes, it does.
I mean, it's true.
Okay,
and a lot
right.
of it was intentional because she's a spinoff of Warhen, and Warhen is a direct parody of Warbird from Carol Danvers's probably the second most famous outing as a superheroine. And again, going back to kind of what we were talking about at the very beginning of the show, it's just I think so. Just some guy's review, he basically said we've had 2 years to kind of critique the industry, and finally these guys came along and they gave us a substitute for that character. And it just dawned on me, it just clicked that I was like, has it really been that long? Because I would have thought to myself, like, no, surely someone would have filled in that gap. Because I mean, honestly, amongst our circle of friends, it's a very common critique is Captain Marvel sucks, this character sucks, man, superhero females suck, they can't be written properly. And so Mark and I just came in and we were just like, here's an opportune moment for us to come in and kind of do something. I mean, even her name, Carly Vanders, it's a direct parody of Carol Danvers, so kind of in the same way that Slade Wilson and Wade Wilson are analogs of each other.
And it's not that different than what Tim was talking about at the start of the stream, where when we did Black Ops, it was because there weren't any patriotic military and war comics. Like G.I. Joe was being written by Aubrey Sitterson at that time, and that's when it was all like anti-America. Captain America was being written by, I think, Mark Waid at the time, so it was all like, whoa, where's America? It's lost its way kind of stuff. So we wanted to do a patriotic military book that would satisfy or appeal to the G.I. Joe fans and the Captain America fans who weren't being served at that time by the real thing. And same thing with Common America, all the people who are lamenting the loss of the true Carol Danvers. There's Common America, who in some ways she's an original character, but she was started out as a parody. But in a lot of ways, she can appeal to the people who miss Captain or Ms. Marvel and would like to see something like her, and they aren't being served right now.
And that's one thing.
There's another comment. There was a comment I wanted to add to that too. I think probably the greatest, I guess it's a compliment that happened within the last 2 months was that there's a Twitter handle. I think it's called Comic Waifus or something. And so they featured Common America as a comic waifu. And it harkened back to a talk that we had, you and I, Matt, where I was talking about how there was a way that females in comics were depicted in the 80s and 90s, up until the 90s, I would say, that it wasn't necessarily that they were sexualized, but they were presented in a way where I think as a young man, you grow up thinking that that is the type of girl that you wanted, not because they were objectified, but because they embodied a sense of femininity.
Yeah.
And so we try to do that, at least aesthetically, with Common America, because, for example, people were like, well, we want the waifu pillows. And so I struggled with that for a long time because I was like, I don't know where I would go with this. But then I thought, there's a way of doing it where you can have her depicted in a way that is very tasteful and not conducive to anything that's objectifying while still being tongue-in-cheek. And so being featured on the comic book waifus was like, I don't know, I thought that was actually kind of a neat endorsement in a way, because what we want to do with the character is make sure that she's not lewd. She's very wholesome. And the number one request that we get is to do like a nude variant, and that's never going to happen. In fact, I'm going to write it in my will where it's like, if whoever inherits the character, like, you are not allowed to depict the character in this way, that way, or the other, because she is supposed to represent kind of a Miss America type level of wholesome beauty.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here and speak on your behalf to the ether. Listen, internet, she's not yours. She that beauty doesn't belong to you. You can appreciate it from a distance.
Oh, don't dare them! Don't dare them! That's not how the internet works.
I know. I know what you're saying, 100%. But like, I mean, that's probably already happening.
Well, my request is that if you're gonna do Rule 34, at least do it well. I don't want to see any of that like pregnant foot fetish diaper stuff out there.
You don't want to see some good old fashioned vor.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, God, no.
The whole point. I mean, like that's something that we in the modern world we forget, right? Like, okay, I'm going to take a note from one of my favorite films, right? Groundhog Day, right?
That's a good one.
The thing it's great, but the thing about Groundhog Day is that like Andie MacDowell is not just some girl, right? She is a representative of the ideal of the feminine, right? And it takes Bill Murray millions of years to become worthy of Andie MacDowell's time, right? That's the point, and that's the kind of thing that Carly really is. Like,
yeah, and I'm gonna take a note from you too. Weren't you the one talking about Popeye?
Yeah,
and you were talking about olive oil, and I had never ever heard that side of justifying the appeal of olive oil until I heard you talking about it. I think last week or 2 weeks ago.
I think
and I was,
but yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, I had never heard that argument, but that makes sense. Where it's like olive oil isn't for you, like that's not the point of her as a character being kind of maybe not the prettiest girl in the room, but it's what she represents, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean that's the same thing. I mean, it's like, and like, you know, a lot of superheroes, even sexual characters that were like Fire and Ice from the Justice League International, where they're both different sides of sexuality. Where Beatrice, I'm sorry, I say that like the Beatrice, Nebraska. So I say I didn't know the name was Beatrice for a long time because I'm from Nebraska, but because the town is called Beatrice. But Beatrice, the Fire character, is this saucy, sexy, overtly almost exhibitionist Brazilian chick.
And she looks naked every time she transforms.
Yeah, she appears naked. She's not actually naked, but that's unless you read the comic, that doesn't matter. Anyway,
yeah, I know.
Yeah, but whereas you know her opposite number, the Icelandic Ice, is reserved and quiet, and they represent two aspects of female sexuality. But the thing that's great about the way that they were written is that they're complementary, and neither are for you. They're both. I mean, because like Fire is over like exhibitionist, but she's also very private in her real life, right? She appears that way, but that's not what she really is. She's too hot to handle, and it's not for you. and Ice is not frigid, but she's very reserved. And so like that was one of the fun dynamics. I'm going to forget the writer's name that worked in between. Giffen? Yeah, it was Geffen. Geffen and DeMatteis for the team. Thank you. But they have it was just a really interesting study in the context of fighting giant monsters and invading aliens and Guy Gardner being an asshole and all that kind of stuff. That was just a really neat take on that. And once again, you're talking about you know, comics being a thing that informed you about sexual politics in a way that wasn't the same way. And I like, you know, the Pete Mary Jane relationship was another example of like, it was an educational aspect, and that was, I mean, good writers were able to broach those subjects in a way that made, at least for me as a young man, made me kind of think about that kind of stuff and tuck it away. And how does that relate to the people that I've met? And it was just an honest storytelling. You get the same thing with Tim Drake and Stephanie Brown in Chuck Dixon's Night Robin. That really was seminal in a lot of ways for that was coming at a time where I was, you know, starting to really think about dating and those kind of issues and internalizing. I mean, I'm not going to say I picked my wife out along those ways, but it definitely figured into the matrix for how I thought about those sort of issues. So, but we're at 2 hours, and I barely at all broached the subject of this projects you got coming up here.
Oh, you want to run through it real quick?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you guys want to be. I don't want to keep you long. I know you're at a different time zone than me, but
we're having fun. This has been a fun conversation.
Okay, yeah. So you've got Common America 2 is coming out this fall.
Yes.
the Wall Might, which is getting ready to wrap up. I'm super excited for that. When are you guys shipping the gold standard? Do you guys know yet, or?
Yes. So I talked to the printer this morning, and apparently we're still on track on having a 30-day turnaround. So that should be shipping out probably the first week of July. The good news is this: we will not launch Black Ops 3 until we do the fulfillment on Wall Might. So even if I have to wait until the last minute to when the last book of Wall Might ships, which it typically will ship within 24 hours, that's when we're going to launch Black Ops 3. I've noticed on the internet we have some people who are launching second and third campaigns without fulfilling the first. Just for the purpose of trust, we will not do that, even though I'm happy to say I'm only 4 pages away from finishing Black Ops 3. So even though I'm going to be done within the next week, we will not be doing anything until the Wall Might campaign or pre-order is finished.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good. I think that's best practice in a business like this. I know, like for my own self personally, we have a campaign that we're late on. We're our pencil artist has been going through some stuff personally, and it's a bummer. But I've got other projects that are in different stages that are working behind the scenes, and I really don't want to. I'm afraid of getting lapped at this point.
Well, but you're given some leeway as like a hobbyist, and I think that's a key difference because, for example, you have like, I know like I'm friends with Doug Garrett, and he's kind of been beating himself up because Legends of the Lone Wolf is a little bit late, and I know the reasons why, and I just for not embarrassing some people, he's not revealing specifically parties involved, but my advice to him is don't beat yourself up because people kind of know where you are. You're updating people. People can tune in on a daily basis. And they can see where you are. And I think there's a big difference in that. When we were late on Trump Space Force, some people were beating us up for being a month late. And I think on some level that's justified. But on another level, it's kind of like, we literally have no idea what we're doing getting into this. But, hopefully we've learned. There's a brief learning curve that you have to go through with any of these endeavors.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you guys as a team have a leg up on is, first of all, you're working way ahead, and second of all, you're both. I don't want to say that doesn't always happen, but it's just a fact. Sometimes you get one partner that's just more invested than the others, and I think that's one thing, or at least their life is stable or whatever. In that, I was listening to Doug Tenaple earlier today was talking about somebody had asked about the video game, the Bigfoot Bill video game.
Yeah.
And he's just like, well, there are 3 guys that are working on it, and they're having some problems. And that's just the way it's going to have to be because life happens.
Yeah, and the good thing is that for us, it's just Mark and me. He's the brains and I'm the brawn. So he's like the nerve center and I'm the machine. If one of us doesn't do it, then it doesn't happen at all. So it's never an issue of something stalling halfway through, because it's an all or nothing proposition when it comes to the 2 of us. And I've actually given him not instructions, but I think we've agreed on a template of what happens in the next 3 volumes should something happen to like one of us.
Like we hit by a bus or something.
Yeah, we already know where it's going. Like we've already plotted way out. And this is something for you, Matt, if you want to do some digging, and people in the chat who are paying attention. The plot of Black Ops 3, it does tie into Common America. But if you look at Black Ops 2 Hair Trigger and look at Common America, you're going to find a big clue as to how the 2 of them are connected. And I guess that's all I'll say for people who like spoilers, because it's big. And I think Marmaduke fan is hunting for it, because he said in his review, he was like, I want to go back and see how this is all connected, because I have a suspicion that the 2 of them have been planting seeds all along the way that we didn't pick up on until now during the big reveal at the end of Common America, where it ties into Black Ops. So where else does it tie in? And so I guess Mark wouldn't mind me saying this, but if you go all the way back to Wall Might First Term Part 2, I think that's where the first seed is planted, obviously, because that's where Common America first appears. But even in Black Ops Hair Trigger, there's something. Even in Common America, there's a tie-in to another book that's not related to us. So we actually planted another thing in there that no one has found yet either.
Well, and I think I actually might know what you're talking about. But I don't want to necessarily talk about that on air.
If you speculate, I will not confirm nor deny.
But that's actually one of the things that I wanted to pick up too, because if I'm remembering right, I believe that USAGI and oh man, I forget, is it Penelope?
Yeah, Penelope.
Yeah, I don't they have a cameo in Soul Finder as well?
They do.
That's what I thought I had seen. That's what I thought I had seen in that, and so
That's true.
That led me to question whether or not if this is going to at all be involved in future Soul Finder projects.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
So Tim and I know, I don't know if this is different than how a lot of other crowdfunding creators and collaborators do things, but we plot our storylines out in advance, which, at least to me, if you're doing an ongoing storyline, is like, why wouldn't you plot your storylines out in advance? But we plot a lot of our details out in advance. So I just finished the script on Common America 2 and sent it off to Tim. But there are little details in Common America 1 that will be carried over into Common America 2. The little seeds planted, and some of it is just visual, things Tim put in there. And you don't know that they're plot points just reading Common America 1 in isolation. But if you read Common America 2, and then you go back and you look back through Common America 1, you're going to see those things and realize that they were there on purpose and they were setting things up. I don't know. I feel like I'm proud that we do it that way. There are a lot of comics where they just kind of make it up as they go along, and that can be fun in a way. But I like to be more meticulous and to plot our storylines out. I feel like we get stronger characters, stronger dynamics, and stronger plots that way.
Well, I know when we were first mapping out our comic universe with Ideal Comics, there were themes that we put in there. Some of our individual details are made up as we went plotted story by story, but then certain elements and big themes have been in place since 2005, right? So I really appreciate that whole thing. And of course, when we were building a timeline dating back to the what ended up being the dawn of time, so there are some of that stuff that is a big part of all that stuff. So I really appreciate the thought and the complexity that you put into all of that. It's actually really interesting because I was chatting with Fly Fox Pro yesterday, and we were talking about how comic universes and shared universes are a good thing for creators, because it gives you a structure that you can't violate, and so it pushes you into, if you're faithful to the universe in a way that, like, say, Grant Morrison isn't, that it allows you to it bringing that back around. It gives you the ability to it forces your brain to be more creative, because there are certain things you can't do. So if you want to accomplish a certain thing or tell a certain kind of story, you've got to find a way to work around it. And that's one of the things that I've long held, that the Comics Code Authority, while maybe it was scurrilous in the way it was implemented, there's still a lot of good creatively that came from that.
I absolutely agree. I think a lot of the best storytelling, honestly, it comes from when you do have age and content restrictions, because it means that you have to be more subtle with things like death or violence or sexuality, or language. And so if a character is just saying, the F word like every other sentence, like the Tarantino movie, you grow numb to it. But if it's something like Transformers and Spike says, "Oh shit, what are we going to do now?" and it's the only time in the whole series where anybody curses, that moment has impact because it's the only time in the whole series where anybody curses like that.
Yep.
Or when, a character dies, it means nothing if characters are just dying in every issue or every episode or every movie. It just, whatever, it's wholesale slaughter. But if you only have one character dying, very rarely that death has impact and meaning, because it's something that doesn't happen very often. I used to do these streams about Thundercats, and we talk about Thundercats episodes. I'm not on it anymore, but one of the things we would do is we would review an episode of the 80s cartoon, and then we would review an issue from the Wildstorm comic that came out in the 2000s. And it's like the 80s cartoon that was written for 6-year-olds is so much more sophisticated than the 2000s comic that was written for edgy 14-year-olds.
Yep.
You know, where that Wildstorm comic that had no limits, so it's just full of sexuality and blood and guts and violence and cursing and everything, is just trying so hard to be edgy and mature, but it's actually less mature than the cartoon that was on Saturday mornings in 1987. And that cartoon was better because it had restrictions, and so you had to be a higher caliber of writer to work within those confines and still tell a compelling story.
Yeah, and I think that's a definite thing that I think we're missing in the modern industry. And I also, a teaser for next week's show for those of you guys who are still in the chat. We're going to be talking about comic distribution and what's broken and what works and what hope can a little indie guy in Nebraska have to have more than 6 people read his comics, and you know, that kind of thing next week. But I think that's one thing that the fact that we don't have any kind of limitations to comics in the mainstream industry, any kind of editorial control in that way, I think actually limits the market in a lot of ways, and that means that the creators are less interested in meeting the needs of their clients, of their reader base, because you know, they just don't. There's no restriction there, and I think that's a factor. So when you guys are looking at coming up here, you've got Black Ops, and you've got all these clues laid in there, and you've got the Common America. I mean, I'm excited. I'm super excited to kind of see how that all pans out. And I have to confess now, though, that some of that's a little egotistical, because I found out that, you know, a certain long-haired bearded man with a 4-letter last name is going to be in the book there. So that's kind of exciting.
We're buying your compliance. Yes.
You're not. I will say this though. So that's the good news. The bad news is that, you know how they say you should always kill what you love?
Attributed to Faulkner, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, I took Faulkner's advice to heart. If you have an Easter egg in Black Ops 3, it does not end well with you. It's a give and a take. I'm sorry to say. I don't know if that's a spoiler for you, Matt.
Well, I guess then you don't have to worry about continuity long term. So
not unless you reappear, like then you have some major continuity issues after that. But then I'll let you explain that in your own headcanon. Like how did you return between volumes? You know, but no, I worked in a ton of Easter eggs, because this one, there's a military base that's involved. There's we have at least 3 locales. Our body count is a whole lot higher, but we have good guys and we have civilians. And I was like, man, how in the world do I fit Easter eggs in here? So I think I have more Easter eggs in this one than any other book that we've done so far. But unfortunately, it's all cannon fodder.
Well, and that's actually saying something, because if you go back to the My Hero Macadamia, and the first volume, I think especially the first volume or the first issue of volume 1, my God, you had tons of Easter eggs in those. Oh
yeah, and I think I've doubled it just in terms of the body count for this one.
Wow.
Problem with Easter eggs is that within the sanctity of the narrative, they have their own continuity, and if you mess that up, like 30 issues down the line, then it gets confusing. They did that in Ninja Turtles in the Mirage comic. If you go and you read the Raphael micro, the Raphael micro series that introduces Casey Jones, Eastman and Laird gave themselves a cameo in that, where they play muggers and attempted rapists. Where there's this girl that they're like mugging in an alley, and they're like, "Yeah, you got nice legs, sister. Why don't you spread them for us? We'll be real nice for you." And then like Casey Jones and Raphael come in and beat them up, and that's it. But the 2 characters that look like Eastman and Laird don't show up again until volume 4 when Splinter dies, and they're at Splinter's funeral. It's like, I know why they're there because they're supposed to be Eastman and Laird, but within that universe, they're rapists. Why are they at this guy's funeral?
Well, it's that simple, Mark. What just happens? You have the 2 guys who got their asses kicked, and then they're like, we have to reevaluate Everything.
Right.
I just got beat up by a jackass with a hockey stick and a turtle.
And a turtle, yeah. They reevaluated their life choices.
There we go. That'll stitch that continuity together.
See, that's
my
what,
only fear with Black Ops 3 is that I put a ton of people in there, like people we know, and then I realized that I was like, oh, I think person A hates person B. Person B hates person C. I was like, a lot of conflicting things happening in here. People are like, do I want to pick this up because this guy I don't like is in it too?
Yeah, well, I think that's one thing that people have to really realize, and I think that's one thing that if the last 2 weeks on comics Twitter had taught anyone anything, it ought to be, don't pick sides. Just live life. Try to be as true as you can, because the bottom line is, like, I have people on my show that really don't like each other, and sometimes I do the big panel shows, and I'm like, okay, these guys are both professing Christians. We're here to talk about Christianity. Will they hate each other? And let's let the Holy Spirit sort it out, man. That's what I'm gonna say.
I'm gonna be a voice because I'm a contrarian. I'm gonna be a voice for the opposite and say, we need to just hate each other but do it better. Because it's because I think it's so funny because like back in the day, it was cool for Sega Genesis and Nintendo to be like, we're gonna stick it to you, man. But it was like the sort of like stick it to you, man, that like it was kind of like surface level. Like it's like that sort of sports. It's like when you're on the field, it's like, I'm gonna tear your throat out. And then later it's like, we're gonna go out for drinks, And like Marvel and DC were kind of the same way. Like they would snipe each other. They would do pot shots. It'd be like, again, like we need to bring back the 90s era of rivalry where it was okay to hate your opponent in that sort of like, I'm pro my team, but then be like, we're all going to go out for drinks afterward, as opposed to be like, I am going to try and destroy your livelihood on social media.
Sega in the 90s, their slogan was like, Sega does what Nintendo don't.
Yeah.
And that was like a sick burn for them back then. Now it's like Sony would be like, hey, Nintendo's racist.
Exactly.
Miyamoto's a Nazi. Don't buy his stuff.
Well, he's at least Japanese. No, but I think that really when it comes down to it, part of that has to do with the issue of quality, right? And so you have some players that are like, well, I'd love to bash their quality, but Tim and Mark keep putting out excellent books ahead of schedule. What can I insult them about? Oh, wait, Mark's Italian.
Oh yeah, I speak with my hands so much.
But people will pick something like that, and I think that in our
Tim's a rabbit,
and people, that is an insult that gets lobbed around if you pay attention. But yeah, it's stupid, but it's true. But that's one of the things is like, and I think it's part of the social media aspect. It's part of the nature of the soundbite that is Twitter. It's also part of our political narrative. Instead of talking about what works and what doesn't and what makes quality, everything's this post-truth idea of social programming and virtue signaling. And so it's less about what's good and more about, oh, I just hate them because of the, all of this groupthink ideas, identity politics aspect.
Well, I mean, they know that we're conservatives, and even though Common America and Black Ops are not political books, they're not like our Walmart books or Thump or anything like that. The easy go attack on us is like, oh, they voted for Trump, 2 scoops, current year, and then they go into that on us, and like, but Trump isn't even in Common America or Black Ops. That has nothing to do with it. They're like, you voted for Trump. They'll do that. It's one of those.
Your mom voted for Trump.
Oh shit! Leave her out of this. But it's like, so Larry Hama. I'm not going to speak for Tim, but I know I don't agree with Larry Hama on a whole lot of stuff that he says. Mm-hmm. But he still wrote the best G.I. Joe comics ever, and his run on G.I. Joe is still phenomenal. And I may not like the opinions that he has or the perspectives he showcases on social media, but I'm not going to say he wasn't the best G.I. Joe writer ever.
And the other thing too about that is we do a lot of conventions, and a lot of the people who are acerbic online, they're perfect gentlemen in person. And I think, and I think that's something that we have to always weigh in our minds is in our reality, which is the true person? Is it the person whose true self comes out online, or is their true self the one that conducts themselves well in public? Because, for example, I think Howard Mackey was going on a tirade yesterday on Facebook, but we had dinner with him. We sat across from him. He was a cool guy. And so there's a part of me that withholds judgment because I'm like, okay, he's acting this way online, but I've met him. And there's a part of me that thinks that that's the real him, is the one that I have encountered in person. On the other hand, there's a lot of people that we know who are jerks online and offline. So the personality actually matches no matter how you see them. And I think that that's how their true colors always are.
So this is a philosophical take on here. I think both are the real person. And I think that people forget that. Right?
Yeah, because it's a Jungian mask.
Exactly. It's a mask. And we believe we're not accountable for the things we say online, but the internet never forgets. That's the one thing. And the second thing is that like people like to believe that they're virtuous. And so then instead of holding themselves to virtue, they just because they believe themselves they are virtuous. So that people believe that exudes from their inner person. And so however they behave is virtuous. But you don't get to act the same way when you're facing somebody as you would online. And so there's a vitriol that gets put in there, I think.
There's also a theory called public script, private script, which is basically the idea that like there's a part of you, because it's like which self is you? And kind of like, Reese was saying, it's like, because every person's self is not monolithic. You have multiple facets to yourself. There's a part, and there's many people who have this like, a public script of things. They'll be like, oh no, that's bad, that's terrible, and I would never support that. And then they go home and
vote for Trump.
Right, exactly. Or they're like, these are things I would never say in public. Go home and say whatever the heck they want. Public script, public level, public front face, and then like who you are in private. And like they're both you. It's just the different levels of who you are. So it's an interesting mix of.
And I think that's why just over time, I'm more friends with conservatives than I am with liberals, even though I kind of have a healthy mix of both because we work in academia. It's unavoidable. You're going to have a friend or a coworker who is on the left and you're just going to click because there's a lot of things that you like that are mutual to each other. But I think over time, the conservatives outweigh the liberals for one reason and one reason only. You talk about the public script and the private script. I have met that with most conservatives, the two tend to meet more in the middle with conservatives because, for example, I'll have a coworker who's on the right, and while he won't publicly say to his students certain things that might be controversial, he will most definitely say it in a hushed tone when eyes might not be around, but he is still willing to say it in that kind of pseudo public private sphere. Whereas I've noticed a lot of people on the left, they will virtue signal publicly, but in private, everything that they think is antithetical. Like I think I've honestly heard more like N-words dropped by people on the left than I have on people with the right. And I'm just like, wait a minute, like I thought that you were all for like anti-gentrification and for the BLM movement and stuff. And then I'll talk to them privately and they'll be like, yeah, but that N-word did this and this and this. And I'm like, geez, like that's completely different than what you say in public. And that's really hard for me to trust.
Well, it's funny that, Sarah Silverman and Jimmy Kimmel, who are hard leftists, both performed in blackface, but I haven't seen any footage of Larry the Cable Guy or Jeff Foxworthy in blackface.
Well, it gets stuck in the beard.
Yeah, right.
But I think a part of that has to do with the so many conservatives and right-leaning people, and I don't want to get into my whole theory on the philosophy of the right because I think people misuse terms a lot, but
sure.
And or use them in a way that doesn't actually hold itself together. But that's a whole different discussion, which I had with Matt Krotz last summer. You can go check it out on my channel. Anyway,
I think I saw that episode. I've seen a lot of your stuff.
It was a fun show, but part of the thing I think it comes to is that there's the modern and pre-modern ideas that underpin a lot of even what you call classical liberal ideas that underpin the conservatism, the idea that truth exists, right? And so there's the idea, well, if truth exists and we ought to be seeking truth, then maybe we ought to make our inner man and our outer man align more clearly. I think that's a subtext that at least some people hold to in that idea. And I think that would be more common in a worldview that holds the idea of a truth existing, rather than one that claims that, oh, my truth is X and your truth is Y. That whole postmodernist malarkey, if I can get away with saying that.
Well, and that's just stepping one step back to what you're talking about with the whole notion of the terminology we use, conservative, liberal, right versus left, that type of thing. One thing that I've noticed that some people were talking about maybe 2 years ago, but they don't talk about it as much nowadays, but I still think it's in action, is I think that with Donald Trump, the definition is turning as fast and as rapidly as the world is turning. I know a lot of people who are politically on the quote unquote right, who have ideals that are not matched up with what one would consider to be lockstep with the right. For example, I know a lot of atheist and agnostic people on the right who honestly probably speak a lot more truth than some people who might actually classify themselves as being down the checklist of what conservatism wants in an individual. So I think that what's happening is because you have Donald Trump, who is such a polarizing figure, probably because his political career was spent kind of jockeying back and forth between left and right. You have kind of this pragmatic politician figure. And some people who like him, they like him because he breaks the mold as far as that is concerned. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because I think any pursuit of the truth that is done in honesty creates more honest individuals. And I like it better when a person like a Cassandra Fairbanks comes on the scene and she's very honest about her voting record. She'll be like, I was a Bernie supporter, and then honestly, like I was converted to thinking in terms of the Trump conservative fashion, that I don't have to necessarily go down the checklist of all of these things, because as an individual, I am never going to agree with all of them. And I think that seeing people pursue the truth in an honest fashion is great for society, because it shows that the market of ideas is still open, as opposed to, let's say, Antifa or people on the far left, where I feel like in order to be in that club, you have to be a member of everything that they say.
I think pragmatism has a real place in the discourse because it demonstrates what works. My hesitancy with some of that thinking, though, is that what isn't happening is a discussion about why it works. And
yes, correct.
The frustrating thing to me is that we already knew why it worked. That's why we have America. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. You know, the Jefferson, Madison, John Locke, Blackstone, they already figured it out, right? That heritage, that tradition showed us a system that matches the universe. But we stopped talking about why it works, and then we took it for granted, and then the commies got in and screwed everything up. And now we're left here at the beginning of the 21st century having to rediscover why it works, when if we just read our flippin' history books, we would already know.
Well, and I think, so you bring up a good point. I think so what I've been telling a lot of our friends is the person to look to in terms of this dichotomy is Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. I do think that his son is going to run for president soon, in terms of probably in our lifetime, he will run for president. But the key difference between he and his father is a pragmatist who honestly does not know the ideology behind it. All he knows is from practical business. He knows that this works because the other thing failed. But if you were trying to cue him in or grill him on John Locke or the readings of Thomas Sowell, he probably doesn't know. But his son is more of an ideologue, and he actually knows a lot of the academic writing and the history behind it. And I think that makes him a more formidable candidate than even his father was. So I might be wrong, but I do think that he's going to be a political figure to watch in the next 20 years.
Yeah. And that actually, that level of ignorance that Trump has was one of the reasons I couldn't vote for him and I also didn't believe him. I really expected in 2016. I really expected him to pull the Vortigern gambit, and I don't know. That's a deep cut for those of you who don't know your Arthurian legend. But Vortigern was the semi-mythical king of the Britons, who hired the Saxons to come in and be his bodyguards because he had killed his way to the throne. And they brought their children and their crops and started taking over. And so when within a generation of Vortigern's long reign, and after his death, Arthur ascends to the throne to kick out the Saxons. That's the story. And so I really expected Trump to be that kind of a villain. And darn it, if I wasn't wrong.
Well, it wasn't just you, Doug TenNapel and Doug Ernst. I know Doug TenNapel voted for him begrudgingly. Doug Ernst has repeatedly said that he did not. But it's one of those things where it's a case where it's good to be wrong, because the alternative would have not been good. Okay. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And if anything, if he can get your vote this year, he's earned it. And I think that's the most important thing.
Well, I mean, when you look at the rollback of the or just not hiring people for the bureaucratic state, right. the massive number of constructionist judges that got put into place, those two things alone are something that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. I mean, to see, I like it. But it's honestly, like, Mark and I, we were not very political up until Trump. Like, to be honest, I actually kind of gave up on the Republican Party during the Bush administration. I still do. I don't donate to the GOP. I donate directly to Donald Trump, to his family, or to him as the individual. And so it will be interesting after he's gone, as far as like his terms are concerned. And I think that going back to kind of our body of work, it's one reason that Mark and I are leaving behind Walmart, because we've kind of told what we needed to tell. We've opined what we've needed to say about it. There's really not much I think there is for us to add to it. But I think one blessing of having done Walmart and Thump first is it kind of granted us an immunity to talk about politics, because a lot of people see us as political commentators and cartoonists first, and comic creators second. And I've noticed that we haven't gotten the same pushback as a lot of other people have, where it's like, Rick Remender, work on your book and shut up about politics. It's almost like no one ever says that to Mark and I. They never say, like, Tim and Mark, focus on Common America, stop talking about Trump. They kind of know it's already baked into it.
I think you don't get that much anymore. You kind of got that a lot in 18. And
a little bit. Yeah. I mean, especially in the beginning.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things, though, is the fact that you basically flipped the bird and kept making books.
Well, and literally everything that we've done has come out of Trump. Like, I hate to say it, but it's true. I mean, it's kind of like, you look at Deadpool. Deadpool was just a knockoff, a parody of Deathstroke with Slade Wilson. I have always encouraged that any body of work, if it's worth doing poorly, it's still worth doing. So if it's something that you feel committed to, I mean, that's the whole point of a free market. Let the market decide. Even like last year when they put out the AOC comic, I had a lot of people wanting us to kind of decry it and be like, hey, you should badmouth this book. And it's like, why? The market will just decide. I mean, it is mostly leftists who cater to that market. So I think they're just doing kind of the thing that is incumbent for them to do as business. And if they fail, they fail. If they succeed, good for them. But I would be kind of a hypocrite if I call that out, when in essence we kind of do the same thing.
Well, and I mean, I think one of the things that is when you're, again, you guys are just cranking them out a lot. But I think those of us who started or had a toe in the commentariat, and are trying to or are bridging the gap into creation, I think it's one thing to analyze a work, but there's a real tendency, especially in the YouTube commentariat, to just badmouth work people don't like, and not do incisive commentary about the situation going into it. But what you got to realize, you're in a similar boat if you're making the creation than you are if you're it's a different position to make than it is to just consume.
It is, and you're a little bit more hesitant because you've been through it and you know how difficult it is. And so you tend to give credit where credit is due because you've already done it. You've gone through and you've sweated it, and you know. And I think whenever you hear Mark and I criticize anything, which is kind of rare, it's because we have gone through it, and so we can speak from experience and say, no, there is no excuse because we have done it. And the fact that we have done it without knowing anything means that you, who are always tooting your veteranship, now have zero excuse to say the same thing.
I think part of it comes to too is that it's not that, like, I want to go back to this. It's not that you don't know anything. You guys had a big basis of some knowledge because of kind of working in the licensure like you had. And then I think you had just from listening to you talk about it and everything, you had the wisdom to know what you didn't know. And so you start asking those good questions, like, because all of the stuff, this is one crazy thing. I want to go back to something. One of the things I've heard in back rooms and people talking about, oh, what size do you make the pages at? And I'm like, dude, that stuff was in Wizard in 1996. Like, that's super available. In fact, you can go, when you buy a pad of Strathmore comic paper, it tells you the ratio right on it.
Yes.
You know, you're drawing at 66% larger than size. It says it on it.
I'll tell you this. So, I mean, like, again, because we be very polite. Mark and I, we work in academia. We have to. If for nothing else, it's part of not only a code of ethics, but just part of the decorum. This guy who had made 6 figures came to me and said, so we're making a poster. What is the printing size? I was like, how do you not notice? 11 by 17, 11 by 14, 13 by 18. How do you know all that? How do you not know that? I mean, dear God, you've been working in this quote unquote industry as a quote unquote pro, and you're asking me? I'm the chump. Like, how do I know this? I don't know, because I've done it before. I just could not believe it. And it was funny because it's like, you're asking me, you have Siri, you have Google. I don't know. Sometimes I'm so befuddled. And I think that's one reason why I think the only term I can use is jaded. I think, I don't know if Mark is more jaded than me, but it's one reason why we've kept our distance from a lot of professionals is that they always say never to meet your heroes, and there's a handful of them who I'm very blessed to have known: Graham Nolan, Chuck Dixon, Dave Dorman, Brett Smith. Some of these guys have been just stellar, and the rest of them is just like avoid at all costs. Do not give help if possible. They can do on their own.
Yeah, well, and I think that's when that question just blows my mind. As a guy who's done self-publishing, I mean, like, our first anthology we printed in 2007. Right. So, I mean, like, that's super available information. Well, okay, I got to tell a story on this and then we'll wrap up. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe we'll see. But anyway, when we went to print, right, this was back in the day, like, we didn't have access to a big bed scanner. The closest thing we had was, because we were doing, 11 by 17 paper we were getting in from people. And we went down to the Staples and used the photocopy to photo reduce them small enough where we could scan them on our scanner, right? And we had one particular story. My wife actually did the inks on it. That process, like, smudged most of her ink work down, right? It just vanished. And, like, you couldn't print higher than 300 DPI. That just, the technology didn't exist for it, and all this kind of stuff. And so, when we came back to our, we ended up doing a third printing of our anthology. And enough time had passed where suddenly, like, these big bed scanners were available for pricing and we could do it. So we rescanned in the story and reformatted the artwork, and it looks a ton better. And then, 4 years after that, I find out that most of the print houses, even the ones we were using, were now capable of doing 600 DPI work. And so it's like, it costs the same as it did. And we've had massive deflation in the market. So it's actually cheaper, or mass inflation and stuff. So it's cheaper to produce a comic now than it was in 2007 with remarkably better technology. And so there's like, I don't understand people that are like, oh, I've been in the business for 15 years, and I'm like, and you don't know this? How does this even? I don't understand this at all. And so when people were we're bad mouthing George Alexopoulos for wanting to print his own books. I'm like, no, that's totally doable. The machines that you can buy are the same ones they use in those print on demand factories. It's the same ones, and they're a couple $1,000, but I don't have a couple $1,000.
Yeah.
So it's just wild to know.
It is crazy. Yeah, what some, not just like what they don't know, it's some of it isn't even technical. I was helping this guy. He was a pro. He'd worked in comics for a long time. He wanted to do his own book though, and so he asked me to help him plot it out. And so it's like, okay, well, first thing you should probably do is make a story Bible. And he gave me this blank stare. And he's like, story Bible? And I was like, yeah, story Bible. And he's like, story Bible? What is that? And I'm like, you don't know what a story Bible is? I mean, you don't even have to be a writer to know what a story Bible is. It's in the words, the compound word. It's your Bible of stories. It is your rule book. The word is itself a definition of what it is. But I had to explain to him what a story Bible was, how you how you format it, the kind of information you put in there, the reason why you do that, et cetera, et cetera. And then I found out he had absolutely no idea how to plot story arcs, how to develop characters. He didn't know how to format a script. He didn't know to use really basic stuff. Like if you're writing a script, you do things like insert page break between pages of your script. Like page 27 is the header, and then you finish page 27, and then before you move on to the next page of Word or whatever, you hit insert page break. So that way, if you have to go back and add stuff to page 37, it doesn't push down page 38. Stuff like that. Really simple, basic stuff. He didn't understand any of that, so I really just had to teach him all that. But he was a guy who'd been working in comics his entire adult life, and he didn't even know what a story Bible was. So, I mean, yeah, you find a lot of pros who are like that.
The thing about that I find so shocking, right, is if you're into nerd culture at all, those terms get thrown around. The show last week was me and RJ from Critical Blast and Mike Hutchison sitting around talking about our reading of J. Michael Straczynski's Batman story Bible that he was trying to pitch to Filmation, right? That was the show. Because if you're involved in nerd culture as a fan, writers talk about that all the time. That the Lost guys brought it up all the time. That's just a normal thing. And I mean, some people don't call it that, but everybody knows that you have that kind of stuff figured out. It's just so funny to me that's a thing. The thing
it's baffling, and I think, well, I think looking back, I think Mark and I we're just blessed to not necessarily have the acumen at this point in time, but to have started when we did. Because if we had tried to do a comic like 7 years ago when he and I first were getting started, it would have never gone off the ground. I mean, it really had to come to fruition when it did. And so you're right. I mean, part of it is kind of cheating because we had a little bit of experience having worked in licensing to know at least the business aspect of it. But then again, you're dealing with people who are touting their success as being nothing more than a monetary amount. But I think arguably for us, and I think for you as well, the success is just producing it. It's a miracle that any of this stuff gets produced. Like, Doug Ernst, when I was talking to him after Soulfinder kind of wrapped up production, I was like, what is the one thing that you learned from all this? And he was like, it's a miracle that any book actually gets produced, because holy cow, there's so many moving parts that have to be working in sync for it to happen.
It was so funny before Soulfinder actually came out, like during the IndieGoGo, during the pitch and all this stuff, for like 4 or 5 months, he was just like constantly nervous that everyone was going to hate it. And I was like, nobody is going. I mean, just listen to him talk about the stuff that he reads. No one is going to hate this book. You've been a professional writer for years. Story. The beats. It's going to be amazing.
Well,
and it was.
And the good thing, nervousness is a good thing because, for example, when he flew down to meet Mark and I when we were in Orlando, and we met up with Englentine, we had a blast. I can't believe that was 2 years ago. It felt like last year. Yeah. But he asked for help. He was like, "Hey, I've never done this before, Mark. I know you're a writer. what are just some tips for the script and stuff. So he spent a lot of time, I think, asking the right questions and getting help where he needed it. And so for his second script, Mark and I only gave it one pass because I think he obviously had already learned like everything he needed to know. And it's like, no, I mean, like you're the bird that's ready to fly the nest, and that's it. Like once you learn it once, you don't have to learn it again, and it's good to learn it sooner rather than later, because then you've kind of avoided a lot of the mistakes that your predecessors have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that one of the things is that the inborn humility. That's just maybe not inborn. It's probably trained with Doug. He's probably disciplined in his humility, but it's definitely a part of his character.
it's probably maybe part of a Christian ethos, I guess. I mean, like Doug and I were ruminating on the fact that a lot of the people that we're friends with, we don't find out that they're Christian or religious until later. And I think it's because I have a working theory on this, but that's this topic for another show. But I do think that Christians in general, especially the ones who are rooted in theology and apologetics, I think that it fosters a type of reason and a type of virtue. Well, that goes hand in hand, right? Like virtue and Christianity. You would hope that the two are fitting together, but it's the idea that in this case, like attracts like, as opposed to the magnetic principle of opposites attract. Because he and I were looking at a lot of the people that we had come to know, and we didn't find out until later that they were either Christian or Catholic or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's the rare exceptions that we're most astonished about. So I think that's good. And the good thing is that within the last year at least, we've stayed out of the drama, not necessarily because we don't not actively participate with people, but we found people who are of like mind and don't engage in it in the way that we don't either.
Yeah, and I think one of the big factors too is, and I really think for your sake, there's nothing left to say. I mean, what are you going to do? Just be like, nope.
I mean, that was the funny thing is Mark was showing me this guy. He hasn't shown up in your chat, thank God, but this guy who shows up, who's been following us and a couple of our friends like Nasser and Fresher Luke. Mm-hmm. The other day he was calling Mark and I grifters, and Mark was like, "Do you think it's people on that side?" And I was like, "No, I think it's actually like a far leftist, because the people who don't like us, who are of the same political persuasion as us, they don't call us grifters because it makes no sense.
Yeah,
what's there to grift?
Yeah, you keep giving people books just like they paid for.
We try, and
grift.
this year alone, we'll have put out 4, and then next year it'll be 3. It'll be a rotating schedule, so I guess it's like exclusive to your show, or at least a premiere. But our working model from now on is Common America, Black Ops, Common America, Common America, Black Ops, Common America. So Black Ops is like the summer title, bookended by 2 Common America books. So the good thing is that when you get Common America 2 in the fall, you can immediately save a little bit of money for Common America 3 in the spring. So the 2 are going to be worked on back to back. I should finish up Common America 2 by August, and I will automatically start Common America 3. My goal is that by the time we get to a book in the summer, I'm already 2 books ahead. Like I don't know. I don't take that much time off. I'm maybe a week at the most. So Mark, if you're listening to this, I hope you are ready, because I know you've hammered out that script, but you're gonna have to get ready to do another one.
Yeah, I gotta get
days.
Yep, I gotta get started on Common America 3 now. So we're gonna do our plotting on that one. I do have a novel that's coming out in July on Amazon. It'll be in paperback and Kindle. So I need to do my final proofing of the manuscript on that, and then format it for Amazon. And I'm gonna publish that in July. So I'm going to take a couple weeks to knock that out, and then it's straight to Common America 3, and then to Black Ops 4, and then to Common America 4 and 5, and we're just going to keep going up this pace of while Tim's drawing, I'm writing, and we're always a step ahead.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I just applaud the work on that. So, well, it's 3 hours now.
Woohoo!
This is I've done 3 3-hour streams.
It's always fun. We
oh man,
we play off each other really well.
Yeah.
The conversation just keeps on going.
yeah, I've just it's been a great show. Appreciate it. Thank you all for Twitless. I want to have everybody pitch their stuff. I know we talked a lot about Common America and Black Ops. Is there a place where people can follow you? Do you guys have like a mailing list or anything, or do people just have to hunt for you in the wilds of the internet?
They kind of have to hunt for us in the wilds. Social media, you can follow me at Ninja Inc. That's on Instagram, and on Twitter it's Ninja Inc. Art. Our main hub for books is iconiccomics.com. That's iconiccomics.com. That's where you can typically find our back catalog. Currently, we are sold out of Common America. Right now, My Hero Magademia, the Gold Standard, which is an omnibus collection, it's still available, but not the physical form, just the digital. If you're lucky, once every 3 days, someone will refund the book, and you can just snatch it up when that refund appears. But if you follow us on social media, we're on there every day, so that when some news hits or when we announce a pre-order, you'll be the first one to know when it pops up. But just to give you a heads up, Black Ops 3, it should be debuting either the first or second week of July. Common America 2 will be debuting September, October this fall. But that's our schedule for at least the conclusion of the year.
And Mark, of course, you mentioned you're having a book come out. Can you give us any quick pitches on the book?
Oh, Mark, talk about Kursova, because you're in that one.
Okay, so I actually have something you can get right now. I wrote a short horror story called Just Don't Open the Door. It's available in the Kursova Summer Special, which is on Amazon as we speak. Kursova, Cirsova. In fact, let me see if I can just go ahead and find that link right now and send that to you in the private chat. But yes, I wrote a short story called Just Don't Open the Door. It's about a kid named Sean who is out pulling weeds one morning, and he notices his neighbor come running out the front door of his house looking very distressed and starts like rushing to get into his car. The neighbor looks at Sean and through his labored breath just tells Sean, everything will be all right, just don't open the door. And then he gets in his car and he drives away. And Sean looks at the guy's house and sees the front door hanging wide open and figures he must be talking about a door somewhere inside his house. And the rest of the story is Sean going into the house, trying to find which door it is and what's inside of it. So that's
like a horrible idea.
Yep. Well, he's a kid. Kids are stupid.
That's true. But
So yeah, I got that link right here.
Okay.
You know, you tell a kid not to do something, the first thing they're going to do is do it.
Yeah.
So I just sent the link to that in the private chats. And the book that's going to be coming out in July is called They'll Get You. And it's basically about a kid named Kevin who starts to notice things around his town. He lives in the suburbs. And he notices that nobody else seems to notice them. There's something wrong about them, people doing things that aren't right, settings doing things that aren't right. Then creatures start coming out of the woodwork to try and get him. They start out first in remote places, but then they start appearing at his school, and they start appearing at his house. The people in town start to lose their features. They start to lose their faces. He can't tell who's real anymore, and gradually things start to fall apart, and his reality dissolves around him as the story goes on. And I'll leave it at that. But it's a very paranoid kind of novel, and it's my first prose novel. I wrote an experimental novel like 5 years ago. It's on my Amazon page, but it's one that I just put out there to start my Amazon page. But They'll Get You is my new horror novel that's going to come out in July.
That actually sounds very Twilight Zone-y.
It is. It's a story that, so when I was talking to Nasser Rabadi, who I'm sometimes on his channel, and we talk about horror stories and movies, we just talk about horror stuff because I have a lot of the same interests. And one of the things we're talking about is, you know, if you want to write horror, you kind of need to tell the kind of stories you want to tell, figure out what it is about horror that appeals to you, and tell those kinds of stories. And it took me a while to figure out, like, well, what is my horror? What is the horror that it impacts me the most and is the kind of that I want to tell. And I grew up with like Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I grew up with the Monster Squad and Fright Nights and The Gates and all these suburban kids in suburban horror settings. And that's the kind of horror that appeals to me. And so those are the kinds of horror stories I want to tell. They'll have different sort of situations in them, but that's the horror that really appeals to me and really speaks to me. So that's the niche that I'm working on.
Cool. So that's all. That sounds fun. I will add that link to the description for those, 20 people that'll watch this on replay. Yeah. So I have a really small channel. Side note, you guys know this. But this is my frustration. More people watch my YouTube show than read my comics.
You just need to start doing live readings of your comic on your show. There you go.
I'll just do it like a radio show.
You get some voice acting.
Yeah, there you go. I do have a voice for radio.
I have a face for radio.
Oh, man, you beat me to it.
I also have a face for radio, but I don't let that stop me.
No, I have a face for radio and a voice for mime, so that's why I write.
Face for radio and a voice for mime. I have not heard that. That's amazing.
I got to trademark that fast then. Oh, shit. I'm
man, that's
giving
great.
it away for free tonight. Oh, no.
Twitless, you, of course, are involved in 2 projects. Talk about them.
Okay, very quickly. Let me pop the link in chat. Let me think. Yeah. Okay, so I have a superhero webcomic. Can I share screen?
Yes.
Okay. I've actually got.
I refuse to let the competition share a screen.
Oh no. I have a superhero webcomic called Super Schooled. It's about 2 rival high schools. One of them is for superheroes, one of them is for supervillains, and they're constantly getting into antics. We update twice a week, Mondays and Fridays. So feel free to check in and then forget about us entirely, like most people do. And but it's been a blast. We've been doing it for almost 4 years. We've got about almost 400 strips. Over 400 if you count all the bonus and holiday stuff we do. Currently wrapping up a storyline on time travel, which, of course, messed up the timeline. But we committed to the bit. We did not fix the timeline. It is ruined now, and I am sticking to it, and it's great. So the whole storylines where it's like, oh, we brought dinosaurs back, and they now rule the world, but then we reset it all back at the end? No, dinosaurs are still totally on the Earth now, and we're dealing with it. Really fun webcomic that I do with a buddy of mine. So feel free to check that out. Second project, and I do have just a little bit of art to show off there. So let me share this real fast and then let everyone get on with their lives. But let's see here. So this is the Adventures of Omega Girl. So it's kind of interesting that we were talking about your work, guys, Tim and David, because
who's your artist on that?
A guy named that I met on Facebook. His name's Brian.
I can't see the line art, but his colors are really good.
Oh, it's actually I've got 2 different people. I've got the line artist and a colorist. Colorist.
Oh wow!
2 guys I met on Facebook, and I am basically self-funding this with my poor teacher salary. It's a work in progress. Let me show you just one other image as a teaser. So I'll stop sharing that. And then, hold on. It's this one. There we go. But really enjoying both the line work and the colorist for this work. And it's kind of it's a classic superhero story in a lot of ways. It's our heroine, Omega Girl, as she protects the city of Angel City from the forces of Jackal. And you can actually see the little Jackal henchman being led away there in the last panel. We actually took a kind of a Western superhero vibe, and we're mixing it with just a little dash of the Eastern kind of manga and anime influences. You can see that in some of the action shots a little bit. But just kind of blending all the things I love about superheroes and having the superhero that that I like to describe Omega Girl as is she's a very noble spirit who wants to often redeem the villains. She has a very kind of gentle soul. One thing I've noticed in a lot of superhero comics is just a lot of aggression, and just like kicking you when you're down. And like even when you're defeated, it's like, oh well, you're bad, so I'm just gonna keep punching you, because that's what you deserve. Whereas with Omega Girl, she wants to redeem. She has this very noble spirit, and it's something that I've been seeing from you guys with Common America. So there's kind of some kindred spirits there. I swear I didn't rip you guys off. I got all this from role playing a bunch in video games. So
oh, don't worry about it. We Common America was inspired by Common anime that Mark and I had seen, so it's parallel thinking. Like I just think that's great.
Yeah. So it's a work in progress. It takes me since I'm just doing it, kind of figuring it all out by myself. It's taking me a little longer than I'd like, but I'm hoping to release an issue this summer, an issue 1. So
very cool. Keep us updated. We'll probably have you on the Bunderdome to help talk about it.
Oh, I would love to. Yeah, I will talk your ear off about this project. In fact, I go insane because I don't have a lot of people to like gush over. I love talking about this story. So
yeah, I think Twitless might be the one channel on YouTube with fewer subscribers than me.
Oh, well, the thing is, there's more people watch the Mattriarchy than watch the Bunderdome.
In fairness, you've had some really good content the last few days, man. So
I don't know.
No, I meant Twitless's show. I haven't seen it.
Well, I was about to say the only show that we had on was Mark. Mark had a full custom hot dog on, but I think that the key difference is that we don't look at our subscriber count. We only talk. Basically, it's just an outlet for us to talk. So we just bring on people that we like talking to, and it's like, well, you do know only 6 people watch your show. It's like, all right, that's fine. I mean, we do it mostly just to amuse ourselves.
Well, and I think when it really comes down to it, I mean, for me, like I started this as something to do with a guy I met online, when Matt McGibson, our original co-host, he and I, he came up with this fun name, the Mattriarchy, and I said we need to make something out of this, and he's like, let's do a YouTube show. So I said, sure, I got a spare night of the week, and now it's a thing where this is just part of my life now. So Matt's busy in college and work, and I respect that, but he was a fun voice to have on here. Miss him. But yeah, so just I keep doing it because it's something I do. But yeah, I will go ahead and also pitch my thing here. Forces of Good and Evil is our regular webcomic. We are in the middle of a story called Panic at the Ren Fair, where our kids from Hero School go to a Ren Fair in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where they are participating for extra credit in Hero School. And so all of these characters are from various hero schools across the country. And this is our main character, Chad, who has just discovered in the previous story that his mother was secretly a retired superhero. And so that's all part of that. It's a similar premise to Super Schooled. But I have been doing it since 2003, so deal with it. No, but a lot of it is.
I will. Bring it. Boomer.
There you go. So, but yeah, that's the thing. We've got almost like 550 pages that are up there.
Wow.
So there's lots and lots of reading to do, and all of it takes place so far between October 2004 and August 2005. So our stuff is set with a fixed timeline, and you can also check out some other mini comics that are all part of that. And we don't have a web store set up. And our main website just needs a bunch of updating. So if you go, prepare to be disappointed. But yeah, that's the story. I've got other projects that are working on, but none of them I want to show you because they're not ready. So there you have that. So cool, guys. Thank you so much for checking us out. The show today. It's I think the longest. It's 3 hours and 15 minutes. So
New record.
Oh my goodness. forever. We just got to stop talking. So we're going to sign off next week. Next week, Twitless, and I think Perch of Comics by Perch is going to come on too. We're going to talk a little history, talk a little theory, talk a little getting comics to the masses, and I might even drop some names of some people, but we'll see what happens. Thank you guys for tuning in, Matt. That's me, Mark, and Tim. Thank you so much for coming by. I think
Absolutely, it's our pleasure.
I think I missed that up because my brother's name is also Mark. So there you have that. Anyhow,
did I call you David? I think I called you David earlier.
You did.
Okay. Well, I clearly see your name is Mark, but you know.
David was the troll we were talking about 15 minutes ago.
Yeah. Mark is also a troll, but he's not David. That's the key difference.
I'm just going to call you David because I'm going to commit to the bit. I'm going to commit to my fallacy because, by golly, I can
roll with it.
So, anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. And we'll catch you guys around the internets and keep reading and loving comics. Bye.
Have a good one, guys. Good night.
Good night.